Chapter 183. A peak assassination. From the initial observation of the target, sneaking in, setting up an ambush, hiding, waiting, looking for an opportunity, finding the shooting angle, planning the retreat route. This series of work often took a lot of time, and all of this was often for the moment of the assassination. In an instant, life and death were decided. For real superiors, life and death were often decided in less than a second. It was too late. When the blazing line of fire smashed the bodies of several East Island elites and rushed straight to Li Tianlan, when the line of fire was still running in the air, Heavenly Calamity already knew that his shot was too slow. This was the perfect angle, the perfect distance, the perfect timing, and the perfect trajectory. But the bullet mixed with the raging fire met an obstacle when it flew in the air. A very small and fragile obstacle. The bodies of several East Island elites were as fragile as glass under the bullet shot from the grim smile. But it was because of these East Island elites that the bullet directly rushed to Li Tianlan a little slower. How much slower? Half a second? 1/3 of a second? Or even less? But this extremely short time was enough for Li Tianlan to make the most instinctive reaction. The bright and blazing flame ran across the whole forest. In the flame, the bullet seemed to have completely disappeared, and only the deafening sound of the gunshot was still echoing. Switch positions. Li Tianlan's figure suddenly disappeared. At the same time, in the grass hundreds of meters away, Heavenly Calamity held the famous gun in his hand, grim smile, and directly changed his position. The gunshot was louder. In Li Tianlan's sight, the whole world was like a volcanic eruption, and all in front of him was erupting magma. Compared with the penetration of the last shot, this shot completely destroyed. The flame roared and rushed in the forest. Li Tianlan's body just changed positions with the shadow, and a large piece of flame had directly kicked in front of him. A silhouette suddenly appeared in front of him, completely blocking his body. The dignified and charming plump figure slightly bent her body, with her palms forward, and opened her hands in a fearless manner. A faint blue light curtain shone from all directions on the ground. The light curtain didn't spread but condensed. Boom! The moment the fire wave hit the light curtain, the whole light curtain had become a huge shield. Absolute protection. Knight of the 12 Supermasters of Samsara. A supermaster who was best at defense. Her unique technique was not outstanding in attack, but in terms of defense, there were not many people in the Thundershocking realm, including some half-step invincible realm experts, who could break her defense directly. The fire and the lightning collided, and the whole forest shook violently. Numerous cracks suddenly appeared on the shield, which had almost been condensed into a substance by the lightning. Raging flames spread from the cracks. Horsewoman's body shook violently, and a large mouthful of blood spurted from the corner of her mouth. But she did not care about her injury at all. She just stood in front of Li Tianlan, trembling all over but not taking a step back. Even if she had to die, she would die in front of him. Be careful. Horsewoman's tone was weak. For the first time since she met Li Tianlan, there was a hint of hopeless helplessness and panic on her face. Heavenly Calamity, the top killer in the Dark World, held 2 famous guns in his hands, one whispering and the other grinning. Samsara's information on Calamity wasn't much, but it definitely wasn't little. 2 famous guns made Heavenly Calamity, and Heavenly Calamity also made 2 famous guns. Whisper was a pistol with a fast shooting speed and a large magazine capacity. It was a self-defense weapon for close combat. It was also the gun that Heavenly Calamity used the least. Whisper was dusty because of the grinning. Grinning was a sniper rifle, and in terms of power, it was definitely one of the most powerful sniper rifles under the 12 murderous weapons. Most importantly, this gun could shoot continuously after temporary modification. 3 shots in a row. This was Heavenly Calamity's trump card. With his muzzle, after 3 shots in a row, there were very few targets who could stand in front of him, whether the target was in the Thundershocking realm or the Fire-Flaming realm. This kind of temporary modification was said to seriously damage a certain part of Grinning's body. In short, it burned money, so Heavenly Calamity rarely used it. But now the second shot had broken Horsewoman's shield. Where was the third shot? Horsewoman's mind was blank. Who on earth wanted to kill Li Tianlan? All kinds of thoughts flashed crazily in her mind. Facing the coming third shot, she had no choice but to grit her teeth and fight to the death. The first shot and the second shot sounded almost at the same time. The loud gunshots echoed in the forest for a long time. Duke was already seriously injured and powerless. Dawn was still standing there, but no one knew what he was thinking, and his eyes became a little dazed. Hundreds of meters away, the enormous sword intent in the forest was approaching quickly. The third shot was about to rush out of the barrel. Horsewoman clenched her teeth and her body shook violently. With a slight sound, a large amount of blood spurted from her body into the air like a fountain. The blood and the lightning intertwined and dripped on the shield that seemed to have been condensed into a substance by the lightning. The flames in the cracks were forcibly dispelled. At a glance, the lightning in front of Horsewoman had become extremely ghastly scarlet, indescribably tragic. Suddenly Li Tianlan's eyes turned red. It's useless. In the grass hundreds of meters away, through the sniper scope, Heavenly Calamity stared at the intertwining red and blue lightning in front of him with cold eyes. A trace of a confident smile with an extremely bloody smell appeared at the corner of his mouth. Knowing your importance, how could I not make preparations? After a short but suffocating pause, Heavenly Calamity directly took out a scarlet bullet from his sleeve. The bullet was elegant and long, with sharp edges faintly visible. It was like a blood-stained scarlet color with a strong smell of death. The bullet was called God Destroyer. For many years Heavenly Calamity had worked hard to get 3. This was a big gift not only for Li Tianlan, but also for the superiors of the half-step invincible realm present. The bullet was pressed into the barrel. Holding a grim smile, Heavenly Calamity's smile was ferocious. In his sight, Horsewoman's blood seemed to dye every bolt of lightning red. Her body was shaking, and the shield in front of her became pure blood red. Interesting. He spoke softly, put his finger on the trigger, concentrated, and shot. Heavenly Calamity. All of a sudden, a roar came from behind the blood-red shield. It was an indescribable roar with a rage that was completely beyond reason. Endless fierceness seemed to condense into one point in an instant. Li Tianlan's figure directly rushed out of the blood-red light curtain. As the lightning roared, the blood-red shield in front of Horsewoman was smashed, and countless beads of blood rolled back to Horsewoman's body. Li Tianlan brushed past Horsewoman and took her body to the side. In an instant, through the sniper scope, Heavenly Calamity only saw a pair of blood-red eyes with extreme madness, indifference, ghastly, and resentment. That was a pair of eyes without any human emotions, only negative emotions, scarlet and weird. Feet up. Run wildly. Sprint. Li Tianlan's figure rushed straight over, with complete rage and madness, like a completely enraged beast. All the matter in the world seemed to disappear in an instant. The lightning behind Li Tianlan had completely dissipated. There was no sword intent, no raging fire. There was only a kind of killing intent that was so strong that it made people unable to breathe between heaven and earth. There was no medium, only the most primitive, most naked, and most ferocious killing intent. Kacha. Strange noises kept ringing out. Heavenly Calamity suddenly came to his senses. In a trance, the extremely precious god of destruction in the gun had already been unconsciously shot out by him. This most precious trump card was not aimed, so the accuracy could be imagined. But Heavenly Calamity had no time to care about the pain. In his sight, Li Tianlan's figure rushed over at an incomprehensible speed. At the same angle, in a completely straight line. There seemed to be no weapon in his hand. He was just a person. Indomitable and invincible. Several thick trees that needed several people to hug were in front of him, but he didn't change his direction at all. He just rushed over. The branches and leaves all over the sky shook wildly, and the thick trunks broke into countless sawdust. As the sawdust flew, Li Tianlan's speed was getting faster and faster. That furious roar seemed to have not dissipated, and Li Tianlan had already rushed over half the distance. At this moment, Heavenly Calamity's heart was cold. Fear, even panic, instantly occupied his mind. He held the grim smile in his hand tightly and kept pulling the trigger, but his whole body didn't dare to move. He had never seen a charge in such a situation, and he had never felt such a fierce sense of oppression. Li Tianlan was getting closer and closer, and everything in front of him was smashed into pieces. His reason kept reminding Heavenly Calamity that the person in front of him was just a fire-flaming realm young man, and his real realm was only in the ice-condensing realm. But the figure that was crazily approaching in his sight was like a demon in his perception. The sword light in front of him scattered. In a very short time, Prince Renwu, who was also desperately running, finally got close to Heavenly Calamity. He didn't even have time to breathe but pulled Heavenly Calamity up and shouted in a low voice, "Go!" Heavenly Calamity seemed to wake up from a dream and he suddenly got up from the ground. But he felt his limbs were so weak that he almost fell down again. That extremely crazy killing intent seemed to be getting closer and closer. He shook his head fiercely, put the grim smile on his back and said in a deep voice, "Go!" Shadow Formula. Desperate chase. Dark night walking. His speed was getting faster and faster and everything in his sight became blurred. The road ahead was moving backward quickly, and the rain and the strong wind fell on his face and body, making him feel pain all over his body. The pain came from inside to outside. The strong wind was howling around his ears. But Li Tianlan could still clearly feel that the bones in his body were making sounds as if they couldn't bear the heavy load. He used all the unique skills that could speed up. Li Tianlan almost didn't care about anything. He shortened the distance between them. His realm was rising crazily from the fire-flaming realm to the stabilization phase of the fire-flaming realm, to the peak phase and still rising. His will, which was as firm as iron, was burning crazily. Vaguely, Li Tianlan seemed to feel that he had become an extremely fierce momentum. Everything in the world, including everything in front of him, was smashed into pieces. His momentum kept rising crazily, and his killing intent became more and more turbulent, going straight up to the sky. In the twinkling of an eye, Li Tianlan's soaring momentum suddenly fell straight down, but his killing intent was still rising. His realm, which had reached the critical point of the thunder-shocking realm, declined rapidly, falling from the peak of the fire-flaming realm to the initial fire-flaming realm in the blink of an eye. The bottle of surge potion from North America seemed to have lost its effect. His realm fell from the fire-flaming realm to the ice-condensing realm in a flash, and then continued to fall directly into the chi-controlling realm. Li Tianlan didn't know it. But his falling realm was stabilized at the level of the fulfillment of the chi-controlling realm, and then continued to rise at an almost violent speed. He entered the ice-condensing realm. After the stabilization phase of the ice-condensing realm stabilized a little, almost in an instant he returned to the state close to the thunder-shocking realm. He broke through. Li Tianlan finally came to his senses. The darkness in front of him seemed to become clearer, and the pain in his body was greatly reduced. Vaguely, his third shadow seemed to have a closer connection with him. The path after the fulfillment of the chi-controlling realm went further. At the same time, the ice-condensing realm also officially entered the stabilization phase. Li Tianlan slowed down a little, but his speed increased in an instant. He was happy that there was no breakthrough. The rage in his heart, which seemed to want to kill everything, became clearer. The rage came from Horsewoman. There was no friendship between him and Horsewoman. Horsewoman risked her life to protect him only because of Qin Weibai's order. But it didn't matter to Li Tianlan. At that moment, when the blood-colored shield took shape, he could clearly feel Horsewoman's determination to die. He didn't want to owe this kind of life-risking kindness because he already owed a lot of people and he couldn't afford to pay them back. The rage also came from his pride. He had the strongest physique, the most powerful inheritance, and the most outstanding environment. He was the heavenly son of the world, not king wretch who needed others to stand in his way. Heavenly Calamity had attacked him once and now he dared to attack him again? Heavenly Calamity. You want to kill me? Who do you think you are? The extreme rage made Li Tianlan's eyes completely red. He had completely lost his reason and all that was left in his mind was killing. Prince Renwu was running wildly. Heavenly Calamity was also running wildly. But the distance between them was instantly shortened. 50 meters. 30 meters. 20 meters. Li Tianlan suddenly let out a long roar. His body leaped into the air and he threw himself at the back of Heavenly Calamity, who looked extremely thin. Your Highness, take care. On the ground, Heavenly Calamity felt the absolutely fatal danger, so he gritted his teeth and said that. Li Tianlan was getting closer and closer. Heavenly Calamity casually took out a grenade-like thing and threw it into the air. At the same time, his body directly accelerated and he instantly surpassed Prince Renwu. As a superior of the thunder-shocking realm who had killed many people of the fire-flaming realm when he was only in the fire-flaming realm, how could he only have a whisper to protect himself when he was approached? This grenade wasn't very lethal, but it was also a powerful weapon that could help him get out of danger. As for Prince Renwu, he wasn't Heavenly Calamity's employer on this trip to East Island, or even the whole East Island. The reason why they cooperated tonight was because they helped him get out of the chase once. Now that they had done that, Heavenly Calamity didn't care about the ending. Another 500 meters ahead. He would be absolutely safe. Heavenly Calamity, you. Prince Renwu's expression changed dramatically. That grenade flew into the air and a silver light flashed in the air. The human emperor turned into a long spear and directly blew up the grenade. In an instant, countless shrapnel flew up along with a large amount of fire, and an extremely condensed impact instantly hit the space within a dozen meters nearby. The air was violently twisted and the airflow was turbulent. Li Tianlan suddenly slowed down like he was suddenly hit by a strong wind. In the storm, Prince Renwu staggered and his eyes were gloomy and ferocious. He was very clear that Heavenly Calamity was Li Tianlan's target, and so was he. Now Tianyu escaped with serious injuries, Holy Light left, and Bai Yi also escaped. He was the only one left. But he was behind Tianyu. How could he die? Prince Renwu's expression became more and more ferocious and twisted. He was a nephew who was highly valued by the Mikado. Among the princes in country R, his position was only second to the crown prince. After Night Spirit was destroyed, East Island wanted to use the Shinto power and the remaining foundation of Night Spirit to support a new superpower to replace Night Spirit's position. Prince Renwu, who was extremely talented in martial arts, became the most obvious candidate. He still had a very exciting future, so how could he die here? At this moment the prince's heart was filled with ferociousness, but there was only regret in his heart. If he didn't chase after Dongqing Rushi, if he didn't want the border Praetorian Corps of Zhongzhou State to become his bargaining chip, if he didn't plan to capture Li Tianlan alive. There were too many ifs. How good would it be if none of them happened? In the great regret, Prince Renwu suddenly shook the long knife in his hand. The knife light surged up and there was a patch of dark green in the twisted airflow. Prince Renwu managed to stabilize his body, then he raised the knife and moved forward. The mountain fell and the ground cracked. The lightning and the dark green knife light intertwined and chopped at Li Tianlan. Vaguely, the silver long spear in his sight turned into two swords. The sword light flashed. Prince Renwu seemed to hear the sound of the joints in Li Tianlan's body exploding, and there seemed to be a surging power pouring out of his body like a river. Prince Renwu still didn't feel the sword intent, and there seemed to be a sharp sword light in the light. There was no sword intent and the world was filled with killing intent. Jianshirsi, slaughter. The bright sword light instantly chopped the chaotic airflow caused by the explosion of the grenade. Li Tianlan didn't even look at Prince Renwu. He rushed past him and went straight to Heavenly Calamity. The sword light forcibly chopped countless airflows and lightning. The long knife in Prince Renwu's hand was broken and the green light scattered. In front of him the whole world was broken into pieces. Countless bloodlines spurted out from his body. With a muffled sound, his arms, legs and head were all separated from his body. The sword intent exploded in his body, and the body of the Prince of East Island, who was trying to change a princess a few minutes ago and was supposed to have a bright future, was directly torn into pieces. Help me. Seeing that the grenade didn't work, Heavenly Calamity finally couldn't suppress the fear in his heart anymore, and he suddenly shouted at the front. There were still 300 meters. At this distance Li Tianlan could save him. The forest in front of him was dark and silent. Li Tianlan's figure behind him came quickly and he was getting closer and closer. Heavenly Calamity clenched his teeth and turned around directly. A large amount of blazing fire rose up around him and there was lightning in the fire. Heavenly Calamity had a grim smile on his back, and in his hand he had already taken out a very simple short gun, but the muzzle was very deep. The short gun was a little longer than a normal pistol and its caliber was also a little bigger. It was completely gray and didn't look very eye-catching. But this gun was one of the most famous pistols in the whole dark world. Famous gun whisper. Li Tianlan's figure swooped down. Facing Li Tianlan, Heavenly Calamity's figure moved back quickly, and at the same time he held whisper and fired quickly. Bang bang bang. Dense gunshots exploded in the forest and countless bullets flew towards Li Tianlan in the air. Li Tianlan's figure seemed to have disappeared completely. Behind Heavenly Calamity, there was only a ball of fire that was burning at its limit. Heavenly Calamity shot crazily and his face was grim. In his sight, the fiercely burning flames suddenly exploded, and countless sparks flew out, covering all the area within dozens of meters. There was even ice in the sparks. Ice and fire were flying, and Li Tianlan's figure kept flashing in the spreading ice and fire, as if he was everywhere. In the blink of an eye, he had shortened the distance again with the flying ice and fire, and rushed directly to heavenly calamity. Bang bang bang. Completely out of instinct, heavenly calamity shot regardless of the consequences. The bullets rushed to Li Tianlan, and Li Tianlan also rushed to him. 2 bullets pierced through Li Tianlan's abdomen and shoulders, and blood splattered. Li Tianlan's expression was cold, and he approached heavenly calamity instantly. The human emperor changed from a sword to a dagger, and the human emperor stabbed the upper part of heavenly calamity's hand. A large amount of blood suddenly rose with heavenly calamity's scream. Crazy. This guy was crazy. Heavenly calamity's heart was filled with unprecedented fear. The whisper in his hand kept shooting bullets, but Li Tianlan didn't dodge and almost rushed straight to the bullets. He waved his saber. One after another, deep saber wounds appeared on heavenly calamity's body, and blood flew unscrupulously in the darkness. There was Li Tianlan's blood, and there was heavenly calamity's blood. Li Tianlan's face was pale, but his eyes were like those of a wild beast, and it seemed that he was going to tear heavenly calamity apart. Heavenly calamity had to die. He had to die. Repeating this thought over and over like hypnosis, Li Tianlan's actions became crazier and crazier. Swish. Heavenly calamity, who finally saw what a lunatic was, seemed to be completely desperate. Suddenly he threw the whisper in his hand, and like throwing a stone, the whisper hit Li Tianlan's head hard. Blood splattered. Li Tianlan looked at heavenly calamity, who had thrown away the gun in his hand, and subconsciously froze for a moment. In this extremely rare gap, heavenly calamity, who was covered in blood and whose upper body was almost torn apart by the human emperor, suddenly jumped up and kicked Li Tianlan's chest hard. An explosive sound suddenly burst out from his body, and his whole body, like a meteor, rushed to the forest in front of him at an extreme speed. Li Tianlan chased after him without hesitation. A dark figure suddenly appeared next to Li Tianlan and pressed his shoulder. A low and deep voice sounded beside his ear, solemn and dignified. "Don't move, it's dangerous." Li Tianlan's eyes flashed with scarlet and bloodthirsty light, and he stared coldly at the dark figure in front of him. "I'm Saint," the dark figure said in a calm and brief tone. His whole body was covered in a black cloak, and he carried an ordinary-looking long sword on his back, looking extremely mysterious. "Horsewoman is fine. Everyone is fine. Today's fight is just to save people. That's enough." Saint stood in front of Li Tianlan motionlessly, looking at the forest in front of him, and said in a calm tone. "Enough?" Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows, and there was undisguised coldness in his tone. "Even if it's not enough," Saint's voice was hoarse, and he said softly, "it's not suitable to continue the chase today." Through the black cloak, his eyes were fixed on the forest in front of him. It was silent in front of the forest. But intuitively, Li Tianlan could sense that heavenly calamity didn't seem to run away immediately. "Who's over there?" Saint suddenly asked. His voice was hoarse and calm, and it echoed in the forest hundreds of meters away. There seemed to be a large amount of sword intent in the air, rising and falling like tides. It was quiet in the forest. After a short silence, Saint continued, "Which murderous weapon is it?" "Murderous weapon." Li Tianlan was suddenly shocked, and the red light in his eyes faded away. He woke up from the state of slaughter, and his perception suddenly became sharp. At this moment, Li Tianlan stared at the forest in front of him, and all his hair stood on end. Just in front of him, there seemed to be an extremely huge and dangerous aura in the dark trees. It seemed to be motionless, but in a trance. It seemed to devour the world. That huge sense of oppression was looming, but it was with fatal ferocity and violence. In that majestic momentum, Li Tianlan suddenly felt his own insignificance and powerlessness. Murderous weapon. One of the 12 murderous weapons in the Dark World. Chapter 184. A chapter of more than 5,000 words. The murderous weapon didn't move. Saint didn't move either. The desolate atmosphere filled the world, and the atmosphere was so oppressive that it almost solidified. Li Tianlan's boiling blood gradually calmed down and then became cold. It was piercingly cold. He was in a trance in the dark rain. Relying on his intuition, Li Tianlan could almost clearly feel the muzzle of the murderous weapon pointing at him from a distance. A huge sense of oppression and crisis completely enveloped him, as if he would turn into wisps of dust after a loud noise. Confrontation. It was quiet in the mountain forest. Li Tianlan's pupils had been extremely condensed, and the sharpness in his eyes had completely disappeared. His eyes were full of thick darkness and deathly stillness. The world was full of killing intent. The killing intent was invisible and intangible, but it tore his clothes silently. One after another, bloody wounds appeared all over his body. The wounds were very thin and shallow, but the blood kept flowing. Li Tianlan clenched the human emperor in his hand and suddenly took a step forward. Saint's expression hidden behind the cloak changed dramatically, and he straightened his body almost instantly. Li Tianlan's face was expressionless and his pupils were dark and gloomy. The killing intent driven by the murderous weapon in the forest was turbulent fiercely as he moved forward. The pressure was like a mountain, and the naked and cruel evil spirit turned into real killing intent, wrapping Li Tianlan layer by layer. Li Tianlan continued to move forward. The second step. His entire body was already covered in blood, yet his body still stood ramrod straight as he passed through the layer upon layer of killing intent emitted by the murderous weapon. An extremely fierce battle will seem to have risen from the ground and shot straight into the curtain of rain above. In this life I can't be defeated and I can't retreat. If I fail I will die. There is no way back. Saint's eyes were slightly relaxed. In his perception, in the mountain forest hundreds of meters ahead, the intense danger that even he could clearly feel seemed to be quietly retreating. It retreated but did not disperse. The mountain forest in front of him seemed to be full of fierce killing intent, which was integrated with heaven and earth, like the rising sun and the setting moon, irresistible. The killing intent in the air gradually receded. The danger gradually receded. Saint grabbed Li Tianlan's shoulder and retreated to the battlefield at the back with him. The battlefield was a mess. This chaotic battle that had only lasted for a few minutes was extremely tragic. Those who survived naturally did not have it easy. As for the dead, not to mention a complete corpse, not even the most fragmented parts were left. The knight and the duke were leaning against each other. Both of them looked abnormally dispirited. Both of them had pale faces and were covered in blood. Their auras were also declining. There was no doubt that the knight was wronged. Heavenly Calamity was known as the contemporary Gun King, and the power of Grim Smile was amazing enough. But it was not so easy for him to kill a top thundershocking realm master like Knight. If Knight got close, Heavenly Calamity could not even hold on for half a minute under Knight's attack. Even if Knight could not break through the blockade of Heavenly Calamity's firepower, it was not easy for Grim Smile to hit Knight. But tonight, Knight stood straight and took the second shot of Grim Smile without dodging. Now he was only seriously injured, but he still had some strength left, which showed that the guardian of the Supermaster of Samsara deserved his reputation. Dongqing Rushi had already woken up as if she had just woken up from a dream. Her clear eyes were full of confusion and she looked a little confused. Seeing Li Tianlan and Saint walking back together, her eyes slightly brightened. She struggled to get up and walk to him, but then she seemed to think of something. She waved her two tender white hands, and the night rain suddenly condensed into blue frost, and then turned into a cloud of semi-liquid water vapor. She forcefully wiped her dirty little face, but after so many days of fleeing, her face was dirty, so how could her palms be clean? As a result, she made use of the water vapor to smear her face more and more dirty. Unknowingly, she had smeared her dusty but still recognizable face into that of a real tabby cat. Even Li Tianlan, who was full of hostility, did not know whether to laugh or cry when he saw this scene. Saint's body slightly trembled in the black robe. As for Knight and Duke, they did not even look at her, as if they were afraid that laughing would affect their internal injuries. Dongqing Rushi also seemed to find something strange. She looked at her hands subconsciously, but she did not scream or get angry. She just stood there quietly, looking a little silly. "Don't wipe it. Go back and do it slowly." Li Tianlan walked over and said softly. He looked at the people beside Dongqing Rushi who were still in a coma and shook his head. Coma was the most instinctive self-protection mechanism of the human body, which was good for their recovery. "I'm very beautiful." Dongqing Rushi looked at Li Tianlan with her clear eyes that were as bright as stars and said in a serious tone. "I can see that." Li Tianlan nodded. Facing Dongqing Rushi, it seemed that he had a headache and was a little embarrassed in any situation. I told Grandpa that I would marry you after I graduated. Last time you went to my house I ran away. Are you angry? Dongqing Rushi could look straight into Li Tianlan's eyes at first, but in the end she subconsciously lowered her head. Suddenly, Li Tianlan's blood appeared in her sight. The gunshot wounds and knife wounds were exposed to the air through the torn clothes. Although Saint had helped to take out the bullets and put medicine on them, the 4 or 5 bullet holes still looked very shocking. Dongqing Rushi raised her head again and looked at Li Tianlan with burning eyes. Her voice was a little cold, but with a trace of natural and clear childish voice. It sounded very soft. Are these wounds for me? Oh. Li Tianlan's heart sank for no reason. Feeling the vague eyes of the 3 supermasters of samsara around him, he felt a pain in the ass. He directly pointed at Li Baiyan and the others on the ground. These are all my brothers, so that's why. Under the bright eyes, Li Tianlan broke out in a cold sweat for no reason. It seemed that his injuries were relapsing and it was difficult for him to speak. You're still angry. Dongqing Rushi looked at Li Tianlan quietly. Even her tone was quiet, and there was no trace of grievance in her voice. Li Tianlan wanted to deny it, but he felt that this feeling was really weird. He said helplessly, "It doesn't matter at all. The most important thing is whether you like me or not and whether you want to marry me, isn't it?" "I do." Dongqing Rushi's tone was soft as if she was being hypnotized. Li Tianlan asked her if she wanted to marry him, but she said she did. What Li Tianlan wanted was an answer, but what Dongqing Rushi gave him was an inevitable result. Did it matter? It didn't seem to matter. Grandpa said that I can only marry you. It was still that kind of quiet tone. It was not a kind of despair but a kind of calmness with a heart like a starry sky. She said softly, "Grandpa said that I can only marry you." Li Tianlan couldn't understand how much pressure, seriousness and desire were contained in this sentence. He only felt a little headache, but he couldn't hide his pride. Of course he would never admit it. But perhaps every man would understand the kind of secret pleasure in his heart. "Let's go back first." Saint suddenly said, "This is not a place to stay for a long time." The first supermaster of samsara rarely spoke, but once he did, Li Tianlan felt that he was very natural and confident. Duke didn't know him for a long time, but when they occasionally chatted, Li Tianlan enjoyed some flattery from the 4th supermaster of samsara. Duke was naturally an expert, but in Li Tianlan's heart his moral integrity had long fallen to the ground, and he didn't have any demeanor of a supermaster at all. Horsewoman was relatively soft and docile, and she just carried out Qin Weibai's orders. Flaming Fire's hostility to him was almost undisguised, or maybe she couldn't hide it, but she couldn't touch him. Li Tianlan felt conflicted for her. Only Saint was calm, mysterious and indifferent. He was not cold, but his aura was extremely high. Only in him, Li Tianlan felt a little bit of the temperament of the supermaster of samsara. Li Tianlan nodded. Each of them took one person and carried the unconscious people on their backs. Through the forest. On the way back. About 5 kilometers away from the forest, an inconspicuous appearance of a bus had already stopped there. Under the dim night sky, the bus was like a well-disguised big bread. The tiny but conspicuous headlights shone on the winding road in front of them. The rain was drawn along the light into obvious silk lines. Saint walked in the front. Without greeting the driver, he carried Su Chu, who was the heaviest, on his back, directly into the bus. The inside of the bus was not much different from the ordinary bus, but the distance between the seats was so wide that it made people feel relaxed and happy. The seats were all made of leather, which was soft and comfortable. Saint threw the behemoth Su Chu on the sofa, found a seat at random and calmly ordered, "Start the bus." The engine of the bus made a very surging roar and the bus slowly started. Li Tianlan put down Li Baiyan on his back and then sat beside him, panting. The medicinal powder that Saint applied to him on the way was very effective. When the medicine entered his body, he felt a sense of coolness all over his body, and even his spirit seemed to recover a lot. But this kind of medicine took effect quickly, and the time it lasted was also very short. After carrying Li Baiyan for several kilometers, Li Tianlan barely made it to the bus. He was dizzy and his body seemed to be empty. The feeling of weakness kept hitting his body, as if it was going to pull his consciousness into the darkness. Li Tianlan gritted his teeth and suddenly asked, "Which murderous weapon is it?" "Murderous weapon." Before Saint opened his mouth, Duke beside him was suddenly shocked. He looked at Li Tianlan and then at Duke, and his expression suddenly became serious. You were chasing Heavenly Calamity and you encountered a murderous weapon? Is it in Heavenly Calamity's hands? No. Saint was silent for a while and then shook his head and said, no force dares to lend a murderous weapon to Heavenly Calamity, and he is only in the fire-flaming realm. How useful can a murderous weapon be if it is given to him? The person with the murderous weapon is hiding in the darkness and he didn't shoot, so we can't tell which murderous weapon it is. Li Tianlan panted, subconsciously touched his pocket and took out a pack of cigarettes. But he didn't hold it firmly and it fell directly under the sofa. Dongqing Rushi, who was sitting beside him, bent down to pick it up and lit it for him without saying a word. Li Tianlan took a big drag on the cigarette, trying to cheer up his consciousness, which seemed to be about to pass out at any time. Of all the people present, it seemed that no one noticed that when he was chasing Heavenly Calamity, there was one less person on the original battlefield. Maybe someone noticed it, but they never suspected it. When did Dawn leave? Li Tianlan suddenly asked, and there was a kind of well-concealed coldness in his tone. Saint was slightly stunned, glanced at Li Tianlan, and then narrowed his eyes, looking at Duke and Horsewoman. Tianlan, you suspect it was Dawn? There's no reason. Paladin said subconsciously. I just want to ask when he left. Li Tianlan said calmly. Dawn and Daybreak basically belonged to the same force, but he didn't know what this force was called or what kind of cooperation this force had with Samsara. According to Duke, this matter seemed to involve the top secret of Samsara, and at present, only the master of Samsara Palace and Qin Weibai knew everything. Everything was unknown, so naturally there was no way to infer. But any seemingly flawless kindness, on the contrary, was most likely to become the most fatal danger, and he still understood this truth. This was also an important reason why Li Tianlan had not even let down his vigilance against the Dongqing clan until now. What kind of cooperation did the force behind Dawn and Daybreak have with Samsara? In such a cooperation, would his death lead to some other results of this cooperation? Li Tianlan was not sure about this, but he could be sure that there was still such a possibility. The dark world was full of black and blood. How could good and evil be clearly seen under the intertwining of these two colors? Horsewoman thought for a moment and her face suddenly became a little ugly. He almost disappeared when you went after Heavenly Calamity. But there's still one thing that can't be explained. Saint suddenly said, the mysterious force behind them should not have a murderous weapon. Li Tianlan took a drag of the cigarette and asked. Now 11 of the 12 murderous weapons in the Dark World have clear owners. They either belong to the superpowers in the Dark World or some world-class powers, and the missing one has not appeared for many years. The only thing we can be sure of is that the murderous weapon is not damaged, but it is missing. In terms of time, the missing time of the murderous weapon is even earlier than the time when the Li family's infinite sky was destroyed. Duke explained softly, and the mysterious force we are cooperating with this time is just a dark force that has risen in recent years. Many of their foundations are not even perfect, so it has nothing to do with the missing murderous weapon. And the time doesn't match. Li Tianlan took a drag of the cigarette and tried to blink his eyes to prevent himself from passing out. He said calmly, is there no murderous weapon in East Island? The three supermasters of Samsara looked at each other and seemed a little strange. East Island. There used to be. In the organization of Night Spirit. Duke smiled and said in a playful tone. Li Tianlan suddenly understood. The murderous weapon Blue Sky Underworld. This was the murderous weapon that used to belong to Night Spirit, and it could also be said to belong to East Island. But with the destruction of Night Spirit, this killing weapon, which ranked very high among the 12 murderous weapons, was now in the hands of the master of Samsara Palace. East Island had no murderous weapon now. Even if East Island could borrow a murderous weapon, it would not give it to Dawn. And this murderous weapon tonight has nothing to do with East Island. Otherwise, the other side would not have retreated tonight, and it would have been better to shoot directly. Obviously, they don't want to attract East Island's attention. At least they don't want East Island to know that there is a murderous weapon that can threaten the superiors of the invincible realm in their territory. Saint narrowed his eyes and he looked more and more profound. The person behind this has a big plan. Li Tianlan's eyelids became heavier and heavier. In a trance, he seemed to remember the night when he first met Daybreak. That night, Daybreak once said that the barrel of Grimm's Smile, the famous gun in Heavenly Calamity's hand, was given to Heavenly Calamity many years ago. This was a superpower that was really hiding in the dark. What was the real face behind the darkness? Li Tianlan wanted to say something, but his consciousness became more and more dizzy. Darkness came to his eyes and he passed out completely. There was silence in the bus. Dongqing Rushi sat beside Li Tianlan, staring at his face blankly. The light in her beautiful big eyes became dimmer and dimmer. She tried to blink a few times, but she refused to open her eyes again. The bus passed through the night rain, running on the mountain road at a high speed. The raindrops pattered on the window and the atmosphere in the whole bus became a little weird. The bus went straight down. As far as the eye could see, in the distance in the rain, there seemed to be lights faintly. Duke finally spoke. He looked at Horsewoman seriously and said calmly, "Should we tell the palace master about what Tianlan said?" The dark cloak covered Saint's face and his expression couldn't be seen, but his tone was still calm. "Don't worry. I will contact them again in the near future. Let's talk about it then." "I don't think so. What happened tonight was too dangerous. If you hadn't arrived in time." Duke thought of the sword that instantly shattered Rattlesnake's body hundreds of meters away, and then he thought of Heavenly Calamity's shot. He shook his head. "In fact, you were still late. There is no if." Saint suddenly shook his head. "Even if I didn't show up, nothing would have happened." He turned his head and seemed to look at Duke through the cloak. He said in a low voice, "Have you forgotten Dongqing Rushi's sword?" Duke's expression froze, and the sword intent of myriad paths peerless appeared in his mind. He opened his mouth and said subconsciously, "How did you do that?" Saint was a little confused. "I mean, how did you turn that sword into another sword?" Duke was smiling, but his smile was very forced. Saint was silent for a full 5 minutes and then he said slowly, "That sword strike was the real invincible sword intent, which was equivalent to the full attack of an invincible realm expert. It was the remaining sword intent in the silent sword, and Dongqing Rushi could trigger it at the cost of her life in that sword. Do you think I could suppress such a sword strike? And even turn it into another sword?" Duke forced a smile as if he was suppressing the fear in his heart. "So you didn't do it?" Saint's body stiffened. After a long time he said blandly, "Of course it wasn't me. If it wasn't Saint, who else could it be?" Duke didn't dare to think about it for a moment. If it wasn't Saint, it meant that just now, under everyone's eyes, there was a super expert who made a move. He was able to suppress Dongqing Rushi's invincible sword and hide it from everyone's eyes. There was no doubt that he was also a real invincible realm expert. Why did such a person save Dongqing Rushi? Did an invincible realm expert make a move just to save people? Duke tried to make himself believe in this kind reason, but he felt more and more uneasy. It was obviously a good result, but all he could feel was malice. "Now East Island," Saint hesitated and said blandly, "the situation is out of everyone's control. Anyway, be careful from now on." He glanced at Li Tianlan, who was in a coma, and continued, "Anyway, protect this guy. Something happens to him, the boss will go crazy." "I'll try my best." Duke smiled, but his smile looked worse than crying. Saint didn't say anything. He just quietly turned his head and looked out of the window. Through the cloak and the blurry window, the rain and lights outside the car were mixed together, hazy and blurry. The night was thick. The road ahead was bleak and blurry. Only the rain flew tirelessly and messily, sprinkling all over the city. Chapter 185. When he opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was the warm and bright sunshine outside the window. The general trend was surging. It was raining and raining in East Island. The soft light passed through the dense treetops in the yard and through the window, forming a few lines of light with dust on the floor. The quietness seemed to spread all over the world. Time flowed gently in this space with a kind of indifferent elegance. Li Tianlan was in a trance. For a moment he even felt that he was hallucinating. Before he closed his eyes, it was still dark and rainy in Zhongjing, and the neon lights were hidden in the extreme distance. It was just a moment when he closed his eyes. Where was this place? His thoughts were a little messy. He forced himself to sit up from the soft bed, which inadvertently affected the wounds on his body. The pain spread all over his body with weakness, which instantly woke him up. In the battle in the forest in Zhongjing, the superficial sword wounds were actually flesh wounds. The gunshot wounds he got in the process of chasing Heavenly Calamity were the most serious ones. 2 shots hit his abdomen and 1 went through his shoulder. Fortunately, the pistol named Whisper wasn't very powerful. It just had a fast shooting speed and a strong penetrating power. If it didn't hit the vital parts, it wouldn't be fatal. Otherwise, if the bullets of Whisper had half or even one-third of the power of Grim Smile, he would have died without a whole body. Li Tianlan silently felt his state, looking calm. Although he didn't die in this battle, it wasn't optimistic either. The gunshot wounds caused a lot of bleeding, which almost triggered the previous injuries. The worst thing was that there would be a series of fierce battles and they would be decisive battles. What he needed most was combat effectiveness. In his current state, it wasn't impossible for him to maintain his combat effectiveness, but he didn't want to pay the price. His arm was still in a drip and the wound was still painful, but it wasn't heart-wrenching. It seemed that he had applied medicine again. Li Tianlan sighed. Now that he was completely awake, he knew that he was back to the small courtyard in Changdao with excellent environment and concealment. He was about to get out of bed to move his body. Just as he was about to get out of bed, the bedroom door was pushed open. Ning Qianqing, who was in combat uniform carrying a gun and a long sword, walked in. He was almost fully armed. Seeing Li Tianlan, who was about to get out of bed, he was slightly stunned and then surprised. "You're awake? Damn, you're finally awake." Li Tianlan didn't understand why he used the word finally. He asked in confusion, "Where are you going?" He paused and suddenly asked thoughtfully, "How long was I unconscious?" 3 days. Ning Qianqing quickly said, "Qingyan and I live next door to you. We wanted to see how you were before we set off. How do you feel now? I'll call the doctor." Before Li Tianlan could speak, he took out his mobile phone and dialed a number. It seemed that he was calling Horsewoman. Li Tianlan didn't care about this. His face had become extremely ugly. 3 days. He was in a coma for 3 days? No wonder he felt unexpectedly good. After such a long time with all kinds of medicine, his injury had at least recovered a little with his physique. After all, he had drunk a whole set of immortality potions from the Wang family of Beihai. In terms of recovery ability, almost no one could match him. But even after 3 days of recovery, he was still extremely weak, which showed how serious his injury was before he fell into a coma. According to his own estimation, he was in a coma for 1 night at most. 3 days. In this sensitive period, too many things could happen in 72 hours. "How are they?" Li Tianlan lowered his voice and asked in a deep voice. His question was unclear, but Ning Qianqing immediately understood what he meant. He thought for a moment and tried his best to give a concise answer without losing the main point. "The current situation looks pretty good. I know some things. Seems that you had Samsara use their special channels. Some of our people who were scattered outside were picked up and brought back, about 700 people. Now they have safely arrived in Changdao. In addition, about 200 people died and about 300 people are trapped outside Changdao." Li Tianlan listened quietly and didn't say a word. Ning Qianqing was talking about the people on the list. There were about 1,200 people. 700 people arrived in Changdao safely, 200 people died, and the remaining 300 people were still outside with the help. But what about the people who were not on the list? The Battle of Changdao was imminent, and the situation was extremely chaotic. It had reached or even completely exceeded the result that Zhongzhou State wanted. Whether it was Zhongzhou State, Changdao, or other dark forces in the dark world, they obviously didn't have the patience to prolong the chaos indefinitely. Obviously, at this time, they didn't have the patience to prolong the chaos indefinitely, especially Changdao. This was their home field, and the so-called final battle was naturally decided by them. In 3 days, it seemed that the Battle of Changdao, which was originally imminent, was suddenly brought closer to Li Tianlan. In addition to these people, there are less than 300 people who are also trying to break out. Some of them have already contacted us. Right now, everyone is close to Changdao. Everyone is ready for battle. We're not going anywhere, we're just waiting for orders. In recent days, East Island's defense line around Changdao has been broken through several times. They have suffered heavy losses, so they've stepped up their defense. Now we've contacted most of the people outside Changdao. We'll attack from both inside and outside at the most suitable time, and try to get as many people into Changdao as possible. Ning Qianqing walked over, took off the potion hanging above Li Tianlan's arm and held it in his hand. He said with a smile, "Let's go. I'll go out with you to see the sunshine." Li Tianlan nodded and walked out of the room. He was still thinking about what Ning Qianqing said in his mind. Right now, there were at least 700 special warfare elites of Zhongzhou State in Changdao. If they counted carefully, the number might be close to 800. After all, a small number of people broke into Changdao before Samsara used special channels to receive them. Right now, there were about 600 people trapped outside. All in all, it was 1,400 at most. This also meant that nearly one-third of the 2,000 elites who entered East Island at the beginning had been lost. And with the final breakthrough, the number would definitely increase. East Island set up the defense line around Changdao not because they didn't want the elites of Zhou State to enter Changdao. The purpose of the defense line was to make Zhou State lose more blood. Now in the outside world, almost every elite of Zhou State was followed by the elites of East Island. The pursuit had been going on for several days. From this point of view, the final breakthrough was almost as important as the Battle of Changdao that might break out at any time. The goal of Zhou State was to let more people enter Changdao and gather their strength to deal with the final battle. And East Island hoped to reduce the number of elites of Zhou State without paying a heavy loss. So they would chase behind and set up the defense line in Changdao, in order to attack from the front and the back and kill all the elites of Zhou State as much as possible. If they could kill all of them, there would be no Battle of Changdao. Even if they couldn't kill all of them, as long as they killed most of them, the small number of Zhou State people who entered Changdao was nothing to worry about. So this battle was bound to be extremely tragic. Is there any information that we can use inside East Island? Li Tianlan asked in a low voice. He was indeed very weak now and he could almost feel the exhaustion when he moved. But in such a state he should be able to maintain some combat effectiveness. And as time went by, his condition would get better and better. Oh. Ning Qianqing shook his head. Recently, it's hard for us to get any information from inside East Island. We have very little information about the defense line around Changdao. Just as he expected. As Li Tianlan expected, the last surprise attack around Changdao was the rehearsal of the final battle. East Island would definitely block the news as much as possible to prevent the information from being leaked as much as possible while investing more forces. From this point of view, people from Zhou State were undoubtedly in a passive position. Because even if they wanted to rescue the elites outside Changdao, they lacked the information about the defense line around Changdao. How strong was the defense line that Changdao set up around Changdao? Did it have the hope of breaking through, or was it a complete steel plate? No one could say for sure. Judging from the fact that Ning Qianqing was fully armed and ready to fight at any time but didn't give any orders, it was obvious that the commander of the operation was also hesitating. Li Tianlan hesitated for a while and said nothing in the end. In fact, he knew that the intelligence network that Han Shixuan of Zhou State had built in East Island over the years was uprooted, which was an important reason why it was hard for Zhou State to receive relevant information from East Island. But Samsara was different. The mysterious force that cooperated with Samsara now had a much deeper foundation and covert level than the network set up by Han Shixuan. If this mysterious force took action, even if they couldn't get the core secrets of East Island, they could still get some not-so-secret secrets. At least Zhou State wouldn't be at a loss like this. Obviously, this was a force that only cooperated with Samsara at the moment. Samsara cooperated with Zhou State to plot against East Island. But what was the purpose of cooperating with this mysterious force? What was the purpose of this mysterious force? Vaguely, Li Tianlan seemed to have some feelings or intuition. Maybe it was what Samsara really needed. Or maybe it was this mysterious force hiding in the dark that Samsara really wanted to cooperate with. And their ultimate goal might be conflict with Zhou State or even the opposite. Li Tianlan felt a little complicated. Yes, it was complicated. He still believed in Qin Wei by 100%, but when he thought of Samsara he always felt a little weird. If everything proved to be true later. Was his silence today a form of treason in another sense? Treason? Humph. Did he belong to Zhou State? He kept hypnotizing himself, but Li Tianlan was getting more and more agitated. If he really thought about this question carefully, even he couldn't grasp his feelings. The general trend was unpredictable. People's hearts were unpredictable. His stance seemed even more unpredictable. The only thing that he firmly believed in was that he always believed that neither Samsara nor Qin Weibai would hurt him. But he and Zhou State were two different things. Qin Weibai thought so. Even Li Tianlan himself vaguely seemed to think so. But why did he feel a little uncomfortable in his heart? Give me a cigarette. With Ning Qianqing's help he walked into the yard. Bathed in the sun, Li Tianlan's pale face seemed to glow slightly. Ning Qianqing handed him a cigarette and lit it for him. Li Tianlong took a deep breath. After a long silence he said softly, "Anyway, it's good to be alive." Ning Qianqing obviously didn't understand what he meant. He just thought he was talking about the battle in Zhongjing 3 days ago. He nodded with a smile and said, "Indeed, it's good to be alive. Fortunately, you guys arrived in time. I really thought I was going to die at that time, but when I woke up I felt much better. Someone must have fed me medicine." Li Tianlong's heart skipped a beat. He vaguely felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't tell what was wrong. He shook his head and stopped thinking about it. He suddenly asked, "Is there any news about the second batch of elites entering East Island?" Ning Qianqing was obviously refreshed. He nodded, and his eyes gradually glowed with a hint of fanaticism. "There's news. General Gongsun Qi of 9 Heavens will land in Juban in 2 hours. Flaming Fire Supermaster has already left in the morning." Gongsun Qi, Gong. Li Tianlong's eyes flickered and he said softly, "How many people are in the second batch?" "About 600. Ning Qianqing's face seemed a little unnatural. He said, "Because time is too tight, there is no time to lurk, so we can only pursue quality. Although the second batch is small, all of them are real elites. 600 fire flaming realm experts. Zhongzhou State is really going all out this time." Li Tianlong's eyes were solemn and his face was expressionless. 600 fire flaming realm experts. How many fire flaming realm experts were there in the entire Zhongzhou State? The power of the whole country, the plan to topple a country, these 8 words were really not exaggerated at all. At all cost. These 4 words were appropriate. But what Li Tianlong didn't know was that Zhongzhou State was going all out in this battle, and the Eastern Theater of Operations of Zhongzhou State was even more so. What Ning Qianqing didn't say or was unwilling to say was that in this battle General Ning Ziyuan, the commander of the Eastern Theater of Operations of Zhongzhou State, had almost lost his mind. Among the hundreds of thousands of troops in the entire Eastern Theater of Operations, Ning Ziyuan had mobilized more than 90% of the fire-flaming realm experts for this battle. Even if it was for the sake of victory, such a method could almost be called deranged. Ning Qianqing couldn't comment on his father's behavior and he didn't care to. So he simply said nothing. "It's really," Li Tianlong sighed while smoking. When he was about to speak, he saw the pale-faced horsewoman hurrying over. Horsewoman's aura was still a little weak, but she moved fast. After the battle in the forest, she looked at Li Tianlong with a little gentleness in her eyes, but what she said suddenly made Li Tianlong stand up. The final battle is about to begin. On the morning of June 27th. Even under the full suppression of the official of East Island, the news still swept through the entire dark world in a very short time like a hurricane. Samsara was looking forward to it, Zhongzhou State was looking forward to it, and countless people were looking forward to it. Although some things came late, they were never absent. Gongsun Qi, General of 9 Heavens and Azure Dragon of Zhongzhou State, hadn't arrived in Juban yet. Ning Qianqing and all the elites of Zhongzhou State hadn't made a move yet. Under such circumstances, all the defense lines and defense nodes around Changdao were attacked almost at the same time. Lightning and fire lit up in every direction around Changdao. All the experts of the Dark World appeared in Changdao, either inside or outside Changdao. Before Zhongzhou State took any action, all the defense lines around Changdao collapsed almost in an instant and were scattered by the impact. In the chaos, the elites of the superpowers and the elites of Zhongzhou State directly broke through the blockade of East Island. They marched straight in. It was the beginning of the final battle of Changdao, the beginning of the struggle for the general trend. This was a disaster for East Island, but it was a feast for the Dark World. In the chaos, the forces of the Dark World began to step onto the stage of Changdao one after another. All the people in the world attacked East Island together. This chapter was written yesterday, so there was at least one chapter today. He hurriedly glanced at the circle of readers. It seemed that a brother said, "I won't reply to messages." He felt guilty and really didn't dare to read it. He was too ashamed to read it. Once he read it, he would definitely explode. He hurriedly glanced at it and didn't see the whole content clearly. Chapter 186. Undercurrents were surging in the Dark World. Zhongzhou State was not peaceful either. In the whole late June, in a hidden place unknown to the world, countless seemingly accidental but inevitable things were running in an intense and orderly manner. Zhongzhou State, East Island, Northern Europe, North America. In the tense atmosphere of an impending storm, the whole dark world seemed to have formed a big picture and a general trend. It was unpredictable and unsure. For the people in the game of Xianxia state, they spent most of the last half of June in meetings. The meetings of the decision-making committee, the army headquarters, the special warfare conference of Kunlun City, the internal meetings of various combat agencies, and the joint meetings of various agencies. Busy. Under the calm surface, everyone was busy. Yes. Nothing happened, but everyone had a sense of chaos that was extremely uncomfortable. But there was order in the chaos. Almost every time after the end of a meeting, the whole plan of Xianxia state would take a step forward. Under the appearance of chaos, every step was very clear and stable. Although the general trend was chaotic, everyone in the game of Xianxia state was full of confidence. The special warfare forces of the whole Xianxia state seemed to be in a state of extreme madness. For the beautiful future, Xianxia state used all its resources and suppressed all the possibilities of failure to the minimum. Then it was devotion. Constant devotion. And in the process of the whole country plotting against East Island, General Ning Ziyuan, the commander of the Eastern Theater of Operations of Xianxia state, was undoubtedly the craziest one. His actions even surprised all the insiders in the country, and they were even dumbfounded. As the strongest supporter of the plot to overturn the country, among the first batch of nearly 2,000 special warfare elites of Xianxia state that sneaked into East Island, almost 500 of the most powerful elites were from the Eastern Theater of Operations. Among the 5 theaters of operations, Kunlun City, various special warfare agencies, and the 2 special warfare academies, the Eastern Theater of Operations directly took out a quarter of its manpower. Just when everyone thought it was crazy enough, the list of the second batch of elites sneaking into East Island was sent to everyone in the game. Everyone's first thought when they saw the list was that Ning Ziyuan was crazy. Among the 600 fire-flaming realm experts, 118 were from the Eastern Theater of Operations. And there seemed to be less than 130 fire-flaming realm experts in the entire Eastern Theater of Operations. What did they want to do? Including the first batch of 500 elites who were sent away at this moment, the elite combat power of the Eastern Theater of Operations could be said to be at a low point that had not been seen for decades. Among the 5 theaters of operations in Xianxia state, the Eastern Theater of Operations had always been recognized as a large theater of operations whose comprehensive strength was second only to the Central Theater of Operations. But with Ning Ziyuan's 2 decisions, the status of the Eastern Theater of Operations plummeted, and it almost fell to the bottom of the 5 theaters of operations. Moreover, this kind of strength was destined to be a strength that could not be made up for in a short period of time. After all, it wasn't as simple as sending people to East Island. When people were sent out, the files of the elite soldiers belonging to the Eastern Theater of Operations would also be destroyed in the database of the Eastern Theater of Operations. From this point of view, every elite of the Eastern Theater of Operations who entered East Island could actually be regarded as a member of the Snowdance Corps. Even if the Southeast Group wanted to use this force to control part of the Snowdance Corps' right to speak, they didn't need to send people over when the war was about to break out. After all, the Snowdance Corps was mainly under the command of Kunlun City. When the war started, Kunlun City could make hundreds of elites belonging to the Eastern Theater of Operations suffer heavy losses with a little effort. The Southeast Group definitely understood this. But why did they do this time? All this was just because Ning Ziyuan was selfless and devoted to his country. Even a fool would not believe it. But after everyone in the game observed the major groups in Xianxia state, it was hard for them to detect any undercurrents. Although people intuitively felt that this was a game between the Southeast Group, the Special Warfare Group, and even more groups, now at least on the surface, the major groups were united and working hard for the plan of Xianxia state. At least, President Li Huaqing had praised Ning Ziyuan's spirit of serving his country wholeheartedly on different occasions. However, Ning Ziyuan's behind-the-scenes boss, Wang Tianzong, patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, had been silent. Wang Tianzong became more and more silent. Gradually, the eyes of some people with ulterior motives shifted to Ning Ziyuan. The general trend in the dark world was fluctuating, but Xianxia state was completely normal. But this seemingly normal was the biggest abnormality. When the general trend in the distance attracted everyone's attention, there would often be some quiet changes around them. They were not obvious, but they might be extremely important. More and more people began to study Ning Ziyuan. He was low-key, silent, forbearing, kind, tough to the outside world, weak to the inside world, good at compromise and giving up, good at dealing with complicated situations. This was Ning Ziyuan in everyone's impression. In the past many years he had been like this. But now, it seemed to be the same. The afterglow of the setting sun cast the last trace of light on the horizon. The bright moon had just risen and the setting sun had not disappeared. Darkness and dim yellow diffused in the forward and backward movement. In the courtyard of the Eastern Theater of Operations in the ancient capital of Jinling, Ning Ziyuan, dressed in a neat military uniform, walked quietly to his number 3 building. Along the way the patrolling guards occasionally saluted him, and Ning Ziyuan always returned the salute meticulously. His actions were not perfunctory at all. This general, who could be said to be a top figure in the military of Xianxia state, had an ordinary figure and appearance. In the trance of the approaching night, his military uniform with military ranks did not seem to enhance his aura at all. Instead it made him look more low-key. Most of the time, Ning Ziyuan's expression was peaceful. He was not serious, deep, kind or ordinary. Instead he gave people the feeling that he was thinking about something seriously. The outside world's evaluation of him was either weak, low-key or disdainful, but his control over the Eastern Theater of Operations had never been doubted at all. In the compromises over the years, the real power figures from other groups in the Eastern Theater of Operations had changed again and again, but no one had really made Ning Ziyuan suffer a loss. Even Tan Qinghua, a powerful general of the Prince Group, did not gain any advantage in the battle with Ning Ziyuan. Not only did his son die, but he was also forced to leave the Eastern Theater of Operations, which he had been operating for several years, alone. All these results were achieved by Ning Ziyuan's seemingly compromise step by step. Such means could simply be called wisdom. This military general, who was deeply trusted by Wang Tianzong, was definitely a real power figure worthy of careful study by anyone. But imperceptibly he had become a figure that everyone would subconsciously ignore. In the darkness he moved faster and faster. Ning Ziyuan passed by the patrolling guards and continued to walk to his residence. The guards stood there and looked at Ning Ziyuan for a long time. Then they shook their heads and continued to patrol. The transfer of a large number of elite experts in the Eastern Theater of Operations was not a secret. Although ordinary soldiers did not know where these people were transferred to, their departure from the Eastern Theater of Operations could not be hidden from everyone. In the last few days of June, not only the top officials in the entire Xianxia state were studying Ning Ziyuan, but even the guards in the Eastern Theater of Operations were also deeply curious about Ning Ziyuan's series of actions. Ning Ziyuan reached out to open the door of the 3rd building and walked into the hall. His wife was usually not here and his son had already fallen out with him. It seemed that they would never see each other again. On weekdays only he lived in this 2-story wooden building. It was so quiet that it was almost cold. Ning Ziyuan had long been used to this state. He walked past the porch and was about to turn on the light. The light is too bright. It's dazzling. A voice suddenly sounded from the living room. It was light, soft and warm. The person's control of the voice was almost superb. The voice floated into Ning Ziyuan's ears and did not continue to spread backward. Ning Ziyuan's palm that was pressing the light switch slightly paused. The last ray of the setting sun outside the window completely dissipated. The light and shadow in the hall were hazy and silent. Ning Ziyuan calmly walked into the living room. Through the light and shadow he vaguely saw the outline of a human figure sitting on the sofa in the living room. He just sat there quietly. He didn't drink the water, nor did he touch the fruit platter in front of him. He just sat there. This is not a place where you should be. Ning Ziyuan walked over and sat down opposite him, frowning. In the darkness, the black shadow who had been sitting there for God knows how long laughed silently. The meaning was unclear. Ning Ziyuan also seemed to feel that his words were a little inappropriate. He blew down his eyelids and said calmly, "At least for now, this is not a place where you should be. If something happens we can contact each other through emergency channels, or we can meet somewhere else. It's always safer than here. I know you've been busy recently. And now I don't know how many people are watching you. Now I'm afraid that the number of times you go to the bathroom will be recorded, right? How about it? Are you under a lot of pressure? Can you handle it?" The black shadow chuckled. In the darkness, his voice became softer and softer with a very warm sense of intimacy. "Okay." Ning Ziyuan sighed, shook his head and said, "There's always pressure. But I have to do what I have to do." He reached out and rubbed his temples, then took out a folded piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to the black shadow in front of him. My head hurts. I hope I can sleep well tonight. If there's nothing else, leave immediately. Every second you stay here I'll be on tenterhooks for another second. It's okay. The black shadow shook his head gently and said with a smile, You've already mobilized almost all the masters in the theater and the others can't find my traces. Moreover, it's just nightfall so it's not a good time to leave even if I want to. I'll leave when it's late. Ning Ziyuan frowned and didn't say anything. The black shadow lowered his head and unfolded the A4 paper. In the darkness, the A4 paper was vaguely filled with words. They seemed to be names and almost every name was marked with some simple symbols in black and red. A dark blue electric light flashed in front of the black shadow. The light illuminated the names on the paper and then went out in an instant. Although I already know the result, I have to say that you're really crazy this time. It's worth it for us to take the risk to meet tonight just for this list. The black shadow shook his head and sighed and his tone became softer. Ning Ziyuan snorted and said nothing. How did you convince Tianzong? The black shadow suddenly asked, with pure curiosity and no malice in his tone. Ning Ziyuan shook his head. He hasn't been right recently. I guess he's worried about Xianxia. I made this decision and Tianzong hasn't even talked to me. After all, it's the power of Zhongzhou state. It belongs to the Southeast Group, but it can't be said to be the private army of the Southeast Group. The president has expressed his position, so it's not convenient for him to say more. In the dark, the black shadow pondered for a while and then nodded. Firmament and Black Pupil have been in East Island for almost a week. In addition, Kunlun City can't sit still anymore. Ice Crystal and Ice Frost seem to have left Zhongzhou state. Hey, they all want to find their heirs. If they knew this, they wouldn't have done it. Ning Ziyuan was silent. This list. The black shadow hesitated slightly. Is this your decision? After I leave today it'll be too late for you to regret it. Tao what? Ning Ziyuan said blandly. Regret? Am I qualified? The black shadow fell silent. Did Ning Ziyuan have the right to regret it? No one could give a definite answer to this question except for himself. You, on the other hand, should think about the future. When everything comes to the surface, where will you go? Ning Ziyuan said blandly. Slave of 3 surnames, that's not a good title. *T slave of 3 surnames. The black shadow sneered. I only have one standpoint. Has it changed after so many years? In the dark, the two of them were silent. Anyway, we've paid so much. One day we'll get what we want. After a long time, the black shadow spoke softly and his tone was a little erratic. I believe you. Ning Ziyuan nodded, but his tone was a little cold. But compared with what we pay and what we want, is it really worth it? Especially for you? Worth it. Not worth it. Worth it. The black shadow murmured a few times and suddenly sneered. So what if it's worth it or not? Dead people are dead. His tone was cold, but there was a kind of deep sorrow and guilt in the coldness of indifference. Ning Ziyuan's mouth moved. He couldn't see the black shadow's face clearly, so he didn't dare to look at it for a moment. I'm sorry. The general opened his mouth and said in a dry and hoarse voice, I'm sorry for what I did to you. That year. It was my decision for the overall situation. The black shadow shook his head and said in a low voice, If you have the chance, say thank you to Qianqing for me. Ning Ziyuan shook his head with a bitter smile and said nothing more. I'll take the list with me. The black shadow stood up and waved the list in his hand. Someone wants me to say thank you to you. Who? Ning Ziyuan's eyes suddenly froze. Anyone. This thank you, everyone should say it to you. You have no qualms about it. In the indifferent words, there seemed to be light faintly shining into the hall outside the window. The darkness in the living room receded, and the black shadow holding the list had completely disappeared. Ning Ziyuan sat where he was, and the general rank shone with a majestic golden light in the night. He sighed deeply, tired and powerless like a statue full of cracks. At the same time, Daoist State Guest House. A specially modified Mercedes-Benz slowly drove into the antique gate of the guest house under the escort of several other cars, and finally stopped in front of building number 12. The well-trained driver got out of the car immediately. After instinctively looking around, he bent over and opened the door of the back seat. A tall and thin middle-aged man got out of the car and buttoned his black suit casually. The middle-aged man looked about 40 years old. His face was thin and handsome and his expression was indifferent. His lips were slightly pursed and he looked extremely determined. The most attractive thing was his eyes. In the night, he raised his head and looked at the light in front of building number 12. His eyes were like the abyss, wise and deep, calm and unfathomable. A quiet and well-behaved girl followed the middle-aged man out of the car. Blinking her big eyes, she looked at the guest house in front of her curiously and asked, "Dad, why did you bring me here?" The sound of high-heeled shoes hitting the ground rang in the building. A woman who looked extremely elegant and gentle appeared in front of building number 12. Wearing a pair of gold-rimmed glasses, the woman was pretty and charming. She had completely shed all her immaturity, and she looked mature and intellectual. Every move of hers carried the charm and confidence of a mature woman. Ning, why are you here?" The quiet girl next to the middle-aged man opened her eyes wide. The woman, who no longer looked immature but could hardly be associated with the word aunt, was also stunned. Then she smiled sweetly and said, "Xinyan, why don't you stay in Huating? What are you doing here? How were you tricked by your dad? Let me tell you, it's not too late for you to leave now. Your dad is up to no good. He probably tricked you to come here for a blind date. There are several young talents from Europe and North America upstairs. They are all first-class handsome men, but—" She paused and looked at the middle-aged man in front of her with a smile. "Old Han, you've miscalculated this time. Those people upstairs are now surrounding the real goddess. They look like they want to get close to her but don't dare to. It's as if it's a great honor for the goddess to look at them. How can Xinyan have a good impression of them when she sees them like this? At least in my opinion, they are not as pleasing to the eye as our Holong. Professor Ning, you must be joking." The middle-aged man smiled indifferently. "Although I, Han Donglu, am not a big shot, my daughter is not reduced to the point of having a blind date. Today I just brought Xinyan here to have fun." Ning Xini was the vice president of Huating University, the dean of the business school, a famous economics professor in Zhengzhou State, the daughter-in-law of the Zhang family and Ning Qianqing's aunt. The middle-aged man was Han Donglu, the patriarch of the Han family in Huating. He was the founder of the largest fund in Asia, the Flourishing Age Fund, and a notorious super-financial tycoon in the international financial market. Although the Han family was a neutral wealthy family, they had always been familiar with the Zhang family and had a good personal relationship. If it weren't for the fact that the heirs of the two families, Han Xinyan and Zhang Holong, didn't like each other, the two families might really take this opportunity to unite by marriage. "Ning, what are you talking about? What goddess? A blind date?" Han Xinyan was at a loss. Ning Xini chuckled and said mysteriously, "You will know when you go up and have a look." "Is everyone here?" Han Donglu walked into building number 12 and asked casually. "It's not the appointed time yet." Ning Xini shook her head. "There are still a few who haven't come. The Prime Minister is on his way and the representative of the Wang family of Beihai is with him." Han Donglu nodded. They came to the door of an exquisite conference room and pushed it open. There were only a few young people sitting in the conference room. There were 3 men and 2 women. Although the conference room wasn't big, there were only 3 people, so it still seemed extremely lonely. The 3 young men in their 30s were all Westerners. They had white skin, blonde or brown hair, were tall, had sword-like eyebrows and starry eyes, and were in high spirits. They were indeed rare handsome men from the West. When Han Donglu and the others came in, a woman who looked to be in her early 20s sat opposite the 3 Westerners, closest to the main seat. She seemed to say something casually. At that moment, the 3 young men who had a strong aura almost bowed forward at the same time. Even their smiles became eager. The man in the middle with dazzling blonde hair responded to the woman's words as fast as he could. His smile was so bright that it even reminded Han Xinyan of the pug she raised a few years ago that liked to wag its tail at her. The change was so clear and obvious that Han Xinyan opened her mouth subconsciously and looked stunned. She turned her head subconsciously. In her sight, the seat closest to the main seat was a young woman who she couldn't describe at all. She wore a black suit and a white shirt, revealing a part of her snow-white neck. Her long hair was tied up casually. Facing the 3 young men in front of her who were eager to please like a pet dog, her delicate but slightly sharp face was faint, a little cold but beautiful like a dream. Han Xinyan had never seen such beauty. She was extremely beautiful, the kind of beauty that could make people feel afraid. It was a sense of invasion that was almost irresistible to both men and women. Goddess. Thinking of Ning Xini's evaluation, Han Xinyan nodded subconsciously and agreed with this evaluation in her heart. If there were really goddesses in the world, they would probably be like this. There was a kind of refreshing fragrance in the conference room, natural and rich, like the most rare and elegant natural body fragrance of a woman. Han Xinyan was in a trance. It was not the first time she had seen the woman in front of her. About 2 months ago she had appeared on the night Ning Qianqing killed Tan Xilai. At that time someone called her Boss Qin. She seemed to be that Li Tianlan's woman? Han Xinyan's heart was a little confused for no reason and she felt a little ridiculous. The proud, cold, dreamy woman in front of her also had a man? She tried to shake her head. But Ning Xini had already said with a chuckle, "Everyone, let me introduce." She pointed at Han Donglu and said with a smile, "This is Mr. Han Donglu, the founder of the Flourishing Age Fund. You should be familiar with him, right?" The 3 Western young men were all stunned and then noticed Han Donglu coming in. Thinking of their performance just now, the 3 of them seemed to be a little embarrassed, but they still stood up. "Hello, Mr. Han. I'm Luke Habsburg from the Germanic Empire." The young man on the far left stood up with a smile and took the initiative to extend his hand to Han Donglu. His light green eyes looked extremely clear. After coming back to his senses from a trance, his every move seemed to have a very serious style. Han Xinyan felt dizzy. The Habsburg family of the Germanic Empire? In the Germanic Empire and even in the whole of Europe, it was a real giant. Looking at Luke Habsburg's clear and gentle smile, Han Xinyan found it hard to connect him with that. "No, those 3 pugs just now. I'm Raymond Westminster." The young man on the far right also came over with a smile and shook hands with Han Donglu. His brown hair was neatly combed and seemed to reflect a soft shimmer. He was also elegant. Han Xinyan's mouth twitched again. Westminster was an ancient wealthy family from Star State. Even in the whole of North America, it was enough to be listed as one of the top wealthy families. "I'm Xiao." The young man in the center, who was as handsome as a young god, was the last to speak. Under the dazzling blonde hair was a handsome, aesthetic and confident face. Xiao Rothschild. Han Xinyan's heart was already numb. Rothschild. This family name was more than just a Grand Duke of the United Kingdom of Great Britain. Not to mention the upper class, even a considerable number of ordinary people knew the status of this family name in the world financial market. Giants. These were the real giants. Why did they meet with her father tonight? Han Donglu shook hands with the 3 of them. His expression was calm and his tone was extremely polite. "This is..." Ning Xini hesitated slightly and said with a smile, "Everyone is in Huating. I don't know if you 2 have met each other. Mr. Han, this is Qin Weibai, Boss Qin." She paused. She really felt that Qin Weibai's bodyguard, who was like a transparent person, was not someone to be ignored. But she did not know how to introduce him, so she could only vaguely introduce him. "This is Shadowless." Qin Weibai stood up and a faint smile bloomed on her cold face. "Hello, Boss Han." "Hello, Boss Qin." Han Donglu also gave a simple response. Qin Weibai didn't reach out her hand. Neither did Han Donglu. Chapter 187. All the way to the north. He didn't know where he was. He had been chased for many days and he spent most of his time struggling and running. It didn't matter where he was now, because Gu Hanshan only knew that he was still in East Island. About a week ago he passed by the city where he needed emergency supplies. Now he was probably fleeing to the northeast. Other than that he knew nothing and he didn't care to find out anything. Zhongjing Icehouse Juban Nara Ninghu. In the never-ending chase, Gu Hanshan only remembered that he escaped from one city after another, from the urban area to the wilderness, and then back to the urban area. He rested for supplies for a short time, fought desperately and fled in a panic. To the north. He could only go north. The days of fleeing had made him lose contact with everyone in Zhongzhou State. The dark side of East Island was about to rise, but it was still calm on the surface. Gu Hanshan couldn't collect any information, so he didn't know the plan of Zhongzhou State. He even lost the hunting list at the beginning. He had completely let go of the so-called task and honor. Surviving was the most basic goal. No matter what, he had to survive. The light gradually dimmed. There was no twilight on the horizon. The torrential rain that started from Dongdu had completely covered the whole territory of East Island for days. There had been small-scale tsunamis in several port cities. The sky had been gloomy all the time from morning to night and from gloomy to gloomier. In his sight, the undulating barren mountains continued to spread at the end of his sight, and he couldn't see the end. The sky was getting dark and the whole mountain range seemed to be faintly showing a hint of gloom and horror. The torrential rain fell from the sky, accompanied by the strong wind. Endless weeds rose and fell and the midsummer air became cold in the rain. There was no light around. Night was coming. Darkness was coming. Desolate, cold, gloomy and dark. Under the storm the whole world seemed to have come to an end. Everything in sight seemed to be emitting a kind of doomsday brilliance. Gu Hanshan also seemed to be a little powerless. In the weeds that were half a man's height, he lowered his body, took out a compressed biscuit, tore it open and stuffed it into his mouth. He swallowed it along with the rain on the horizon. The chase had been going on for nearly half a month. He had been injured several times and fought several times. His supplies had long been used up. Some medicine that could temporarily increase his combat power, medicine that could heal his injuries, and medicine that could replenish his physical strength had been used up about a week ago. Even the compressed biscuits he had now were looted from a supermarket when he risked his life to rush into Xianxia a few days ago. The tragic thing was that the supplies that were looted from the supermarket were now all used up. It was not that Gu Hanshan had not thought of rushing into the city to do something big, but after thinking about it, Gu Hanshan gave up his plan. What could he do if he rushed into the city? At most he would only be able to control some unimportant hostages, but he would have to risk being discovered by countless people. Zhou State was plotting against East Island. Now every city in East Island was closely monitored by the top. Gu Hanshan could even be 100% sure that once he went to the city, his whereabouts would be exposed within half an hour. At that time, even if he controlled more hostages, so what? In the battle of the Dark World, hostages were never the most important. Only some barren mountains with complicated terrain were the best route for him to escape. But he was not desperate in a desperate situation. In the dark storm, Gu Hanshan's figure was hidden in the grass, and he swallowed the last bit of food in his mouth expressionlessly. The deep exhaustion and weakness almost seeped out from his bone marrow. Gu Hanshan felt that he would fall down at any time. The darkness filled the sky. Between reality and illusion he also felt that his eyes went black for a while. He shook his head hard, sat up in the grass and began to meditate. Meditation was the fastest way to recover spirit. Gu Hanshan had the heavenly king heart. When he entered the meditative state from the silent state, his speed was completely incredible. Because of this, he had enough willpower to drag his tired body to run for so long, and he even had a slight breakthrough in martial arts. But as time went by, Gu Hanshan had more and more clearly understood that it seemed that this kind of persistence was coming to an end. The hunt from the superior of the half-step invincible realm was getting fiercer and faster. No matter how fast he ran and how sensitive he was to danger, this was East Island after all, and the opponent could use countless resources to lock his position immediately. 3 days. 3 days at most, and then he might really be at the end of his road. He meditated for less than 10 minutes. Gu Hanshan had opened his eyes quickly. He sat up in the grass, lowered his body and started to move forward toward the endless mountain range ahead. 10 minutes of rest was luxurious enough and it was also risky enough. 3 hours ago he escaped from Tengu, the superior of the half-step invincible realm who was chasing him. 20 minutes ago he got rid of him. During this time, it was enough for the opponent to lock his position again. But Gu Hanshan had to stop. He really couldn't hold on any longer. The footsteps in the grass were getting faster and faster. Suppressing the feeling of blackness and dizziness, Gu Hanshan clenched his fists and went all the way north. He couldn't determine his specific location now, but he could roughly understand that after crossing the endless mountain range in front of him and continuing to go forward for dozens of kilometers, he should be able to reach Toyama or New Island. As long as he was careful enough, he could take a boat from any port in these two places and continue to go north to the south of Beihai province in Zhou State. Although the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City weren't on good terms, with the former's magnanimity, he wouldn't run into trouble if he fled there. As long as he went ashore in Beihai province he would be safe. But this time the task and the competition with Wang Xingxiao, Gu Hanshan didn't bother to think about it. Speed up. Climb the mountain. Gu Hanshan clenched his teeth and moved faster and faster. In the heavy rain, thunder rolled across the sky, and the mountains seemed to be trembling in the thunder. Pale lightning flashed across the dark sky. The crisis was like an exploding tide, shrouding Gu Hanshan in an instant. There was no time to think. The blazing, solid bright fire instantly covered Gu Hanshan's whole body. The flames surged wildly. The moment the fire lit up, his body rushed forward. At the same time, a large piece of blue lightning fell directly from the top of Gu Hanshan's head. The large piece of fire was smashed by the lightning, splashing sparks and falling on the grassland soaked by the wind and rain. The water vapor was evaporated in an instant, and the wild grass burned wildly. The bleak night was illuminated by the warm fire. In the fire, Gu Hanshan's firm face seemed to be pale and transparent. Heavenly Hound, the left advisor of Wuji Palace, who took action as soon as the thunder sounded, floated in the air expressionlessly. A large amount of lightning swayed around him. Standing in the air, he looked mysterious and powerful, but his face was abnormally pale. Countless bolts of lightning struck the fire on Gu Hanshan's body, and the fire grew. Finally, when the fire disappeared, the lightning in front of Heavenly Hound also disappeared at the same time. Only the sparks that fell on the ground were still spreading rapidly. The fire quickly burned the wild grass about 10 meters around Gu Hanshan, and then it was extinguished by the rain. Thick smoke billowed. Heavenly Hound stared at Gu Hanshan through the thick smoke. The corners of his mouth rose slightly with cruelty and resentment. He said softly, "Run, keep running. Do you think you can still run away?" Gu Hanshan looked at Heavenly Hound in front of him quietly and said flatly, "Do you think you can catch up with me?" The corners of Heavenly Hound's mouth twitched fiercely, and the fire of anger in his eyes suddenly burned. "I can't catch up with you. If I wanted to kill you, you could have died at least 10 times in so many days. The young heavenly son of Zhou State? Oh bullshit." Gu Hanshan was expressionless and did not speak. He knew that Heavenly Hound was telling the truth. So what if he was a young heavenly son? The realm gap between them was so huge that it couldn't be made up. If Heavenly Hound didn't want to catch him alive, Gu Hanshan would have died long ago in the continuous pursuit. In the isolation of the fire and the thick smoke, Gu Hanshan seemed to squint slightly, and a strange light flashed in his eyes. He didn't bother to think why Heavenly Hound wanted to catch him alive. There were only a few reasons. He wouldn't be so arrogant to think that he was the best in the world, but he had never belittled himself. His talent and his identity were enough to make him one of the most important people among all the people from Zhou State who sneaked into East Island this time. This kind of importance was undoubtedly a bargaining chip in the eyes of the people from East Island. Once he fell into the hands of the people from East Island, he would become a very important bargaining chip in the hands of East Island. At that time, East Island would have enough confidence to use him as a bargaining chip to negotiate with Zhou State or trade with Kunlun City. Gu Hanshan took a deep breath. He suddenly felt grateful for his identity, and it was precisely because of this identity that he could seize the opportunity. Yes, it was an opportunity. The continuous struggle between life and death for many days squeezed out a lot of his potential. Gu Hanshan, who was already at the peak of the fire-flaming realm, finally made further progress. Although he didn't completely enter the thunder-shocking realm, he had half of his foot in that realm. The gap between the half-step thunder-shocking realm and the half-step invincible realm was still huge. But Gu Hanshan had the core of Kunlun City's 10 skills of true martial arts, especially the 9th secluded impasse. That move could be regarded as the pseudo-domain in the invincible realm. Gu Hanshan was barely able to use it when he was at the peak of the fire-flaming realm. After he reached the half-step thunder-shocking realm, he had a deeper understanding of this move. In fact, after such a long pursuit, almost all the injuries on Heavenly Hound were caused by Gu Hanshan in the pseudo-domain of the 9th secluded impasse. Superiors of the half-step invincible realm could also vaguely form pseudo-domains. But in terms of domains, the inheritance of 10 skills of true martial arts was far better than that of Heavenly Hound. Heavenly Hound's pseudo-domain only existed a little longer than that of the 9th secluded impasse. But at the moment when the pseudo-domains of the two sides collided, Gu Hanshan would rush up and fight with Heavenly Hound several times without hesitation. That was a way of fighting in which both sides would suffer or even perish together. Heavenly Hound didn't want to die, so he could only get injured in defense. In half a month, Heavenly Hound was consuming Gu Hanshan's physical strength and willpower, and Gu Hanshan was also consuming Heavenly Hound state. There was another move, the ninth secluded impasse. Gu Hanshan narrowed his eyes slightly, and there seemed to be some hesitation in his eyes. Based on the current state of both sides, once the ninth secluded impasse appeared, Gu Hanshan had at least a 40% chance to kill Heavenly Hound, and a 20% chance to retreat with serious injuries. In this way, Gu Hanshan himself didn't know how much chance he had to kill Heavenly Hound and retreat with serious injuries. It must not be high. But this kind of low chance was quite worth a try in the current desperate situation. A bit of fire gradually bloomed between Gu Hanshan's hands. In the barren mountain where the fire had been extinguished by the rain, the extremely horrifying high temperature instantly rose. The heavy rain was still falling, but it had been completely evaporated before it reached Gu Hanshan's head. That bit of fire spread slowly and elegantly, enveloping Gu Hanshan's palm, and then covering his right arm. Gu Hanshan still looked at Heavenly Hound calmly. Faint but extremely strong killing intent had risen and diffused with the raging fire, spreading between heaven and earth. Heavenly Hound's eyes suddenly shrank. He narrowed his eyes and sneered, "What? Are you going to fight with your life? Do you think you deserve it?" Gu Hanshan didn't say a word. His body suddenly took a step forward. In an instant, Heavenly Hound thought of the ninth secluded impasse that he had encountered several times in the past half a month, the 10 skills of true martial arts of Kunlun City, and Gu Hanshan's constantly increasing strength. Almost instinctively, Heavenly Hound sensed the danger and suddenly took a step back. "You don't dare to fight?" Gu Hanshan slightly raised his eyebrows, and there seemed to be a trace of mockery in his calm tone. Heavenly Hound's face suddenly turned red and he flew into a rage. But before he could speak, another voice had suddenly sounded in the void. "He doesn't dare, but we do." In the sky dozens of meters away, the deep blue lightning suddenly flashed, subtle and dim. Gu Hanshan's hair suddenly stood on end. Although the lightning was dozens of meters away, the unprecedented danger seemed to have appeared around him. Retreat. The raging fire suddenly rose to the sky, and the airflow suddenly twisted. The weeds on the ground and the ashes after burning all flew up in an instant. In front of Gu Hanshan, a large area of space seemed to be compressed violently, and the air was forcibly squeezed out and turned into airwaves. His body retreated to a safe distance of 20 meters away with the impact of the airwaves in the blink of an eye, and the sound of violent compression kept coming from that twisted space. Ninth secluded impasse. That pseudo-domain covered the space with a radius of more than 10 meters. A large piece of deep blue light rushed into the pseudo-domain at a fast speed. The lightning suddenly became stagnant. A man in a standard ninja costume floated in the air when the lightning dissipated. His hands holding the dagger struggled subconsciously and his eyes were shocked. The opportunity was lost. Gu Hanshan had no time to be upset or rejoice. He turned around and left without hesitation. His body turned in the dark. A pair of playful and charming eyes appeared directly in front of Gu Hanshan. The two of them were so close that the moment he turned around, Gu Hanshan almost kissed her directly. He forcibly stopped himself and his face suddenly changed dramatically. He didn't know when a woman in black suddenly appeared behind him. Gu Hanshan didn't know how long she had been standing behind him. If he hadn't turned around, he would even think that there was nothing behind him. This was a woman who looked to be in her 30s. She had a very stylish short hair. Because the two of them were so close, Gu Hanshan could even see the fine wrinkles at the corners of her eyes on her face that was no longer young. But this was not an ugly woman. Gu Hanshan completely subconsciously stepped back and tilted his head back. The woman's face suddenly appeared completely in his sight. It was a very mature and charming face, full of charm with a very frivolous and flirtatious look, but not the slightest bit of killing intent. Gu Hanshan's body just took a step back, and in an instant he was pulled forward again. The woman's face became bigger in his sight again. A pair of soft arms hooked around his neck, and a mouth with a little fragrance directly pressed on his lips. It was a brief touch. Before Gu Hanshan could react, the woman who kissed him giggled and said softly in a sweet voice that sounded like a girl's panting, "Ninth secluded impasse? Good unique skill, but it's a pity that you are too young." The sharp pain instantly spread all over his body. There was lightning flashing in front of Gu Hanshan. Vaguely, he only saw a pair of tender white palms surrounded by lightning covering his chest slowly and gently. Bang! In the dull sound, Gu Hanshan spat out a mouthful of blood. His body flew more than 10 meters into the sky, and finally fell heavily at the feet of the black-clothed ninja in the 9th secluded impasse. Gu Hanshan gritted his teeth and struggled to stand up, but his body was getting weaker and weaker. Heavenly Hound, who was also a little sluggish because of the series of changes, finally reacted. With a trace of fear and unconcealable anger in his tone, he said coldly, "Demon Black Crow, what do you mean?" The black-clothed ninja codenamed Black Crow said nothing. Then he put away the 2 daggers in his hands and looked at Gu Hanshan, who was struggling at his feet, thoughtfully. However, the charming and frivolous woman chuckled and said softly, "Heavenly Hound, you are too incompetent. Your ability to handle matters has disappointed everyone. So, Liuhua Palace will take over the task of hunting Gu Hanshan." Demon, the deputy palace master of Liuhua Palace in East Island, was one of the top ninjas in the whole Dark World, and a superior a half-step to Invincible Realm. And Black Crow, who acted with her, was the top superior ninja of Liuhua Palace. His strength was close to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, so he could not be ignored either. Incompetent. If it weren't for you guys, I would have caught him in 1 day at most. You guys are... Heavenly Hound was completely furious. Gu Hanshan was also a very important figure in Zhongzhou State. He was known as the Young Heavenly Sun. Catching him was definitely a great achievement. At the same time, he was also an extremely difficult young opponent. Heavenly Hound had chased him for so long. Seeing that Gu Hanshan couldn't hold on any longer, Liuhua Palace suddenly jumped out to take his credit and said that he was incompetent. Heavenly Hound almost fell from the air. His body trembled violently and he stared at Demon, who was smiling charmingly, and gnashed his teeth. However, before he could finish speaking, Chi Mei had already interrupted him coldly. "1 day? Does Wuji Palace have no concept of time? Heavenly Hound, how chaotic is East Island now? 1 day. Humph, maybe in half a day the special warfare system of East Island will be dismantled by those superiors from all over the world. His Highness Miyamoto, even the imperial family and the office of the Prime Minister can't tolerate your incompetence anymore. Otherwise, Black Crow and I wouldn't have taken action. Do you think we are willing to take your credit? His Highness Miyamoto, the imperial family, the office of the Prime Minister." Heavenly Hound's face changed from red to white, and he was so embarrassed that he wanted to hide himself. "No matter what, I chased him here. Even without you guys, he can't run away. Demon, give me Gu Hanshan and let me take him back to Wuji Palace. Then I'll forget what happened tonight." Heavenly Hound kept silent for 5 minutes and then slowly said, "Wuji Palace?" Demon smiled softly and shook her head. "I think he's more suitable to be a guest in Liuhua Palace." Heavenly Hound raised his eyebrows. Before he could say anything, another abrupt voice rang out. "We think he's more suitable to go to Changdao." It was perfect Chinese. Demon's smile froze and her face suddenly changed. She screamed, "Black Crow." Her words were hurried and high-pitched, but it was too late. A bone-chilling sword intent suddenly spread all over the barren mountain. The sword intent was surging and condensing. The sword momentum was silent. The wild wind in the air suddenly blew violently and turned into a storm. All the weeds around were swept up into the sky, flying messily. The turbulent airflow surged wildly. Demon closed her eyes subconsciously. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. For ice walls suddenly rose up around Gu Hanshan. Along with the appearance of the ice walls, there were 2 rays of sword light that were as cold as glaciers. 2 beams of sword light silently flashed out from the swaying weeds. Everyone's eyes flashed faintly, and the 2 beams of sword light directly merged into one. Demon had just screamed when the 2 rays of sword light rushed to the front of Black Crow. Bright and sharp lightning burst out in front of the sword light, accompanied by blood and broken ice all over the sky. The ice walls around Gu Hanshan were instantly broken, and so was Black Crow's body. The sword light was like lightning, drawing a 100-meter-long icy straight line in the barren mountain. 2 figures hid under a ray of sword light, grabbed Gu Hanshan, and kept moving forward in the flashing lightning and sword light. In the blink of an eye, they flew nearly 100 meters away. Both Demon and Heavenly Hound seemed to be confused for a moment. Clap. The broken ice all over the sky fell to the ground with blood and flesh. Demon's body suddenly shook and she suddenly reacted. She screamed, "Who the hell is it?" Heavenly Hound's face was solemn and gloomy. People from Kunlun City. I soul Ice Frost. He took a deep breath, gave Demon a hard look and turned to leave. Where are you going? Chi Mei let out a shrill scream. Back to Wuji Palace. Heavenly Hound said coldly, if you are not afraid of death, go after him. Demon gritted her teeth and looked at Heavenly Hound's back, motionless. I soul Ice Frost. These two code names might be a little strange in the dark world, but if they were combined they would be really well known. Kunlun City. Ice Soul and Ice Frost Sword. They might be the most famous pair of twin brothers in the dark world. Both of them were only superiors at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. But they had the sharpness that made most superiors of the half-step invincible realm retreat. Demon's eyes flickered for a while, but she didn't go after them. After all, like Heavenly Hound, she didn't want to die. Chapter 188. Defeat. When the ultimate attack and the perfect defense failed, any superior, no matter the young Heavenly Sun or the superior of the half-step invincible realm, could only be defeated and then walked on the road of defeat and death. From Wakema to Chongdao they crossed thousands of miles, covered in blood and fled in defeat. The heavy rain fell hysterically in the forest with crazy momentum. The heavy rain lasted for several days and the forest was muddy everywhere. The wet and slippery ground had a slight upward slope like a low hill. When going up against the slope, one needed to maintain physical strength and couldn't fly in the air. Every step was extremely uncomfortable. The rumbling footsteps behind him were getting closer and closer, as if thousands of horses and soldiers were galloping. The rapidly falling raindrops surrounded the entire forest, but it was difficult to cover the charging footsteps. It was as if thunder was striking the ground and the dull, thunderous footsteps reverberated continuously, causing the entire forest to tremble. Swift, fierce, tireless and full of killing intent. In their sight, a metal monster at least 2 meters tall, was moving straight all the way. The trees in front of him didn't seem to exist in his eyes, and they were broken in the straight way. One by one the trees kept falling as he moved forward. The clear cracking sound of tree trunks broke through the sound of the rain, and now it was particularly ear-piercing. Damn it again! Doesn't this monster have any weakness? In front of the forest, Wang Xingxiao, the heir of the Wang family of Beihai, known as the strongest expert of the young generation in Zhongzhou State, looked at the tall figure rushing toward him. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly and he finally couldn't help but swear. This young prodigy, who was gentle most of the time, had a pale face. His clothes were tattered, dirty and stained with mud and blood. He looked like a beggar, but his mental state was not bad. At the very least, when he cursed he was full of energy. If he really had a weakness, he wouldn't be the leader of the Kusanagi force. A woman in black stood beside Wang Xingxiao and said in a flat tone. Black seemed to be the woman's biggest feature. She wore black clothes, black shoes, black hair, and even her skin was dark. The woman wasn't beautiful because her appearance was too plain, and it was hard to tell her age. This was a woman who wouldn't attract attention anywhere, but she had a pair of extremely weird eyes. Black eyes. Her eyes were huge, but there was no white in her pupils. They were all black and a faint luster flickered in her pupils. They were dim and gloomy like a malicious spirit, making people shudder. She stood quietly beside Wang Xingxiao, watching the metal monster approaching, motionless. They were indeed running, but running in front of this monster was a joke in this kind of weather. This was a monster that had been modified to the point where it was no longer human. It knew no exhaustion, never gave up, and had absolute defense and attack power. In this kind of environment, running away with their backs facing it was equivalent to seeking death. The woman narrowed her eyes, which were so creepy and chilling. She looked at the metal monster that was getting closer and closer. Her dark face was abnormally pale and even a little blue. She looked extremely weak. In such a state, no one could tell that she was a top master in the dark world. Black pupil from the Wang family of Beihai. Within the Wang family of Beihai, which was full of experts and had a deep foundation, her strength might not be at the top, but she was very close to it. An expert who was extremely close to the half-step invincible realm, even if there was no room for improvement, would be the top existence in any superpower. Energy. A deep voice suddenly sounded, calm and hoarse. A middle-aged man who looked like he was in his 40s stood on the other side of Wang Xingxiao. From his position he was even a little closer to Wang Xingxiao and Black Pupil. That was the position where he could withstand the most attacks and fight back first. Once the battle broke out, he could minimize the attacks on the two people behind him. The man was a little short and fat. The expression on his round face was calm, but there seemed to be lightning flashing in the depths of his eyes. He looked calm and intense. Closer and closer. In the heavy rain, the metal armor on the metal monster that was rushing toward them had begun to deform slightly. Almost in the blink of an eye, it changed from the charging form to the fighting form. The muzzle on the shoulder, the saber on the arm, and the gun barrel on the finger were exposed one by one. 50 meters. 30 meters. The rain hit the armor crazily. The armor made of special alloy shone with a cold and sharp light, with a smell of death. 20 meters. The man suddenly reached out and whispered, "Young master, the sword." Without hesitation, Wang Xianxia directly threw the broad-bladed heavy sword that weighed more than 50 kilograms to the middle-aged man in front of him. The sword was named Firmament. The middle-aged man's code name in the Wang family of Beihai was also Firmament. It was not a coincidence that he had the same name as the sword. Wang Xianxia, who had the wind and thunder veins, held the Firmament sword, and Firmament himself was Wang Xianxiao's guardian since childhood. He was the top expert of the half-step invincible realm. Even in the Wang family of Beihai, in terms of combat capability, Firmament could be ranked in the top 5. The heavy greatsword slashed through the air, bringing with it a dull whistling sound. Firmament's fingers bent slightly. In the airflow, the sword hilt fell directly into his hand. In an instant, Firmament's eyes stood up, and the lightning flashing in the depths of his eyes burst out without reservation. Firmament held the firmament. The rain all over the sky suddenly quieted down. The pseudo-domain of the superior of the half-step invincible realms spread out in an instant. An extremely violent sword intent suddenly burst out from the sword tip of Firmament and rushed straight into the sky. After the metal monster put on the armor, his body, which weighed at least 1,000 kilograms, suddenly slowed down in the pseudo-domain. But the weapons on his body were completely ready for battle. The heavy rain all over the sky stopped for a moment and then became violent in an instant. The crazy raindrops gathered in front of Firmament without any pattern. The dazzling lightning burst out from his body and mixed with the rain, directly forming a huge water ball with lightning flashing and expanding in front of the three people. At the same time, all the weapons on the metal monster were aimed at Firmament and the other two people. Boom! In the dull roar, the huge body of the metal monster paused. The armor on both sides of his legs and arms suddenly emitted a large amount of gas. Under the full operation of the thrusters, his whole body completely ignored Firmament's pseudo-domain and completely approached the water ball that enveloped the three people. Fierce gunshots suddenly rang out. On the metal monster's gloves, every gun barrel was madly spitting out tongues of fire. The rain-like bullets splashed on the water ball around Firmament, bringing a large amount of ripples with lightning. His two arm blades had directly pierced into the water ball under the huge force. This was a confrontation between technology and force. There was no communication, no testing. The moment the two sides approached each other, they went all out to fight to the death. The swollen water ball suddenly shrank the moment the arm blades pierced it, and then it expanded again. A soft but irresistible force pushed the huge body of the metal monster back more than 10 meters. Dense bullets rang through the forest. Firmament took a step forward with the heavy sword in his hand. The sword of Holy Path from the Wang family of Beihai. Without a sound, the whole forest became a world of pure lightning and water. The condensed sword intent instantly burst out in the most thorough and crazy way. This was a sword that completely disregarded any consequences. It pressed forward and swept everything in its path. The air was clearly twisted into ripples visible to the naked eye. With the lightning and water, the completely explosive power spread in all directions with Firmament as the center. Lightning shot and water filled the air. In the surging sword intent, the armor on the metal monster's body gradually deformed, and his body kept retreating. The air ripples full of water and lightning hit him again and again, and then swept into the distance, destroying everything around him. After a moment that seemed to last for an eternity, everything in the area of hundreds of meters around Firmament turned into dust. All the grass and trees had completely disappeared. The ground mixed with the rain became unprecedentedly smooth and flat. Standing on the mirror-like ground, Firmament took another step forward. Blood flowed down from the corner of his mouth, but his eyes became more and more excited. He raised the huge sword slightly, and the second sword strike was about to cut the sky and the earth. In his sight, the armor of the metal monster, who had retreated dozens of meters, had deformed slightly, and the red light flashed in his eyes. Firmament moved forward. He also took a step forward. No fear, no pain, no fatigue. This was the highest achievement of East Island in transforming people, and also the most terrifying war machine. Wang Xingxiao had already turned around and retreated with black pupil. They had experienced similar scenes several times in 5 days. In terms of strength, the metal monster with the code name Captain was definitely no match for Firmament. But it was one thing to beat him and it was another thing to kill him. Captain, who was wrapped in armor, didn't need anything at all. Even if Firmament, a superior a half-step to invincible realm, attacked with all his strength, he could only deform the armor. The armor was made of special alloy and with some anti-impact materials. Captain in this state could be said to be a real combination of attack and defense. Under the invincible realm, there were many people who could defeat him, but almost no one could kill him in a short time. He was a pure monster. After Wang Xingxiao went missing, Firmament and Black Pupil went to East Island to rescue him, but no one expected that Wang Xingxiao met this monster. The two met Wang Xingxiao 5 days ago and the change was not big. Before, Wang Xingxiao was being hunted alone, but now the three of them were being hunted together. Firmament and Black Pupil brought a lot of supplies and news from Zhou State. After all, Firmament was a superior a half-step to invincible realm. Even if he couldn't kill Captain, his extreme outburst could completely suppress him and consume most of his energy. So after the three of them gathered together facing Captain's pursuit, there was no danger. But being chased for hundreds of kilometers, even if there was no danger, it was still a pain in the ass. The heavy sword blade was raised. Firmament didn't look back, but his sharp eyes were filled with extreme determination. They were less than 50 kilometers away from Chongdao. After entering Chongdao, they could gather with the elites of Zhou State as soon as possible. Under normal circumstances, the 50 kilometers was enough for Captain to replenish his energy and chase again. But now, Firmament calmly took a deep breath. He drew back his arm that was holding the sword. Looking at Captain, who was rushing toward him again, he suddenly raised his arm and held the sword to the sky. Boom! The air was shaking crazily and the loud sound was like thunder, echoing fiercely in the walls of the air. The rolling thunder spread through the whole forest. A ball of dazzling lightning lit up on the blade of the giant sword and rushed to the sky. The amazing lightning was blooming in the high sky. For a moment, the sky was completely mysterious and dangerous deep blue. There was no lightning in the air, or in other words, the whole space turned into lightning. The deep blue space that filled everyone's sight fell rapidly from the high sky, as if the whole sky was directly pressed down, with a strong sense of destruction. The sword that destroyed the world. The sword that shook the world. Although this strike was still in the scope of a half-step to invincible realm, it was infinitely close to the mysterious invincible realm. All his physical strength was almost sucked out in an instant. All his physical strength, all his sword intent and the ultimate pseudo-domain. Firmament's eyes became crazy and scarlet, and thick blood flowed down the corner of his mouth. The sword strike that was almost beyond his ability didn't cover the Captain's huge body, but he was already seriously injured. The man and the sword became one, and the sword became one with heaven and earth. Heavenly sword of the Wang family of Beihai. The Captain's movements suddenly stopped. He raised his head with a rigid expression, looking at the rapidly falling deep blue sky, a bit hesitant. Divine wind. Glacier. Tide. Defense. Hibernation. The moment when the deep blue sky was about to cover the Captain with the amazing sword light, a cold roar suddenly rang out. The Captain's scarlet eyes and his armor suddenly lit up. Without hesitation, he squatted down, his huge body curled up and turned himself into a huge ball. The sword light suddenly arrived and completely covered the Captain's curled up body. The earth shook and the mountains shook. The ground that was as smooth as a mirror suddenly cracked, and countless dense cracks appeared on the ground. A big hole with a diameter of nearly 20 meters appeared where the Captain was, and his whole body had disappeared from the ground and he was blasted into the ground. Puff. Chapter 189. There's one more chapter ahead. 2 chapters in a row. Firmament's expression was still calm, but there was bitterness in his eyes and even the will to die. No one knew better than him how powerful the sword strike that was infinitely close to the invincible realm was. Under normal circumstances, that sword strike couldn't kill Captain, but the sword he forcibly drove at the cost of being seriously injured was enough to make Captain use up all his energy, and even make his damage reach more than 50%. Once this sword strike was used, Captain would not be able to chase after them in the future, and he could even directly withdraw from the Battle of Changdao this time. But at the most critical moment, someone modified Captain's order and forced him to enter the dormant state with the strongest defense. In this state, not to mention the damage of Captain, the most important thing was that the person who modified Captain's order was now approaching this battlefield quickly. After days of hunting, Captain was finally not alone and he had a helper. The person who could control Captain's order, even if it was temporary, must have a high status and strength. Captain was unable to fight anymore, but with a strong enemy on the side he could only continue to escape. Oh, Firmament! A burst of playful and surprised laughter suddenly sounded in the air. Two figures suddenly appeared in front of Wang Xingxiao and the other two. Long time no see. I'm really surprised to see you here. Ah, and Miss Black Pupil. What a surprise. Well, Mr. Wang Xingxiao's strength also surprised me. You're indeed the young heavenly son of Zhongzhou State. Ah, you three look a little embarrassed. If you don't mind, I plan to invite you to Dongdu as guests. I wonder if you have any objections? The lightning fell and dissipated. Two middle-aged men who looked exactly the same appeared in front of the three at the same time. They were two extremely handsome men. The weirdest thing was that both of them had waist-length hair and wore kimonos, looking old and gloomy. At this moment the two of them blocked in front of Wang Xingxiao. One of them was smiling and the other looked gloomy. Tide Glacier. Firmament sighed and said blandly, "Your duty doesn't seem to be to deal with the conflicts in the dark world, does it?" Tides Glaciers. These two experts who used to be famous in the dark world, could be said to be unknown now. They were also twins, but in today's dark world, the most famous pair of twins was Ice Crystal and Frost Sword of Kunlun City. As for Tide and Glacier, who had already withdrawn from the dark world, no one remembered them. However, Firmament knew their origins. They were the former giants of the Divine Wind Force. 10 years ago they were the left and right commanders of the Divine Wind Force, the second and the third in the Special Warfare Center of East Island. But about 8 years ago, after the two failed to reach the invincible realm before the age of 40, they were both disheartened. They left the Dark World and went to the East Island Imperial Palace. They were now the left and right guards of the Mikado. The reason why Firmament knew them was that when the Mikado of East Island visited Beihai Province a few years ago, they met and Wang Tianzong told him about the origin of the brothers. Two half-step invincible realm experts. Furthermore, they were twin brothers who shared the same thoughts. The corners of Firmament's mouth became more and more bitter. Even in his heyday he might be able to suppress one of them, but when the two of them joined hands he was absolutely no match for them. And now he was seriously injured and couldn't even hold one of them back. This is East Island. Tide chuckled and said softly with a smile on his face, "Anything we think is necessary is within our scope of responsibility. Including bullying the weak and catching a junior? The captain of the Kusanagi force hunted him down for half a month without any result, and then you two came here. You really made East Island proud," Firmament said in a mocking tone. Although the captain still has a human mind, in the process of transformation, the sharpness of his mind will inevitably decline. Now he's very stiff. Tide sighed and said with a smile, "East Island's current scientific and technological power is far less than that of Zhongzhou State. If we could also develop something like the Four Spirits armor, we would also choose a real person to lead the Kusanagi force. But unfortunately we can't do that." Firmament narrowed his eyes, forcibly suppressed his serious injury, and started to increase his strength desperately. Tide didn't seem to mind his dying struggle. He continued, "In fact, if time permits, we don't mind if the captain continues to play with Mr. Wang Xingxiao. Anyway, he will be caught sooner or later. But now time doesn't permit it, and neither does the situation. You three are too close to Changdao, so we came here. His Majesty the Mikado thinks it's not suitable for you three to go to East Island now. On the contrary, the Imperial Palace is the most suitable place for you. Mr. Wang Xingxiao is a very important person, we think. He's not the only important one. Gu Hanshan is also uncontactable. You've made a lot of secret deals with Kunlun City in recent years, haven't you? Catching him can also bring you greater benefits. An Ice Crystal Frost Sword has now arrived in East Island. Don't you want to meet him?" Firmament calmly interrupted Tide's words. Firmament, are you insulting us? Ice crystal frost sword? What the hell is that? Before Tide could say anything, Glacier, who had a cold expression on his face, took a step forward and spoke in an eerie voice. He wasn't tall and he was wearing a kimono. His waist-length hair made him look even shorter. However, as he walked forward, an extremely eerie killing intent gushed out from him, causing people to subconsciously ignore the fact that he wasn't tall enough. Firmament smiled and didn't say anything. He held the sword hilt tighter and tighter. The sword energy circulated around him and became more and more obvious. He knew why Glacier was so angry. Ice Crystal Frost Sword was famous in the Dark World now, but in fact a few years ago the Dark World didn't have this name. At that time they called it Ice Crystal Sword Master and Ice Frost Sword Master. The word Sword Master had a very special meaning for the Dark World of Xianxia State, because this word had always belonged to Mount Shu in the past hundreds of years. Ice Crystal Frost Sword from Kunlun City called themselves Sword Master, which was obviously a provocation to Mount Shu. As for whether Gu Xingyun, the governor of Kunlun City, planned it or not, no one knew. Because before the series of conspiracies could be carried out, Wei Kunlun, the Nirvana Sword Master of Mount Shu, went straight to Kunlun City and challenged the twin brothers who were at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm at that time. After that battle, the two sword masters became the Ice Crystal Frost Sword of today. Glacier and Tide were both figures of the half-step invincible realm, and they thought highly of themselves. They didn't think they were inferior to Wei Kunlun. He compared Wei Kunlun's defeated opponents with them, which showed his disdain. Ice Crystal Frost Sword is not worthy for us to intercept. Only people like you, Firmament, and young heavenly sons like Mr. Wang Xingxiao are worthy for us to come here. Oh, and Miss Black Pupil, your eyes are so charming. Maybe they will be more beautiful if we dig them out. What do you think? Tide chuckled and squinted his eyes. He didn't look at Firmament or Black Pupil anymore. His eyes fell on Wang Xingxiao, who looked calm. Well, I think we don't have to waste time. Young Master Wang, are you going back with us? Or are you going to resist? No matter what choice you make, we are very welcome. I can go wherever I want. Now I want to go to Chongdao. Wang Xingxiao said blandly, make way. Good spirit. Tide gave him a thumbs up and praised sincerely, it's a pity that your strength is too low and Firmament is seriously injured. What capital do you have to resist us? Miss Black Pupil? She's not enough, far from enough. You can try. Wang Xingxiao suddenly reached out his hand and took the giant sword from Firmament's hand, smiling more and more gently. That's not a good idea. Tide shook his head and said seriously, I advise you not to resist. Today we are here. No matter what, you have to go with us. No one can stop us. He really didn't want to fight with Wang Xingxiao. If there was an accident in the battle, more than one heir of the Wang family of Beihai would be killed or injured. For East Island, it meant tens of thousands of square kilometers of land rented by the royal family, which originally belonged to East Island. They can't stop you, but what about me? A soft and cold voice suddenly rang out from afar. A white dot suddenly appeared in the distance. When the voice rang out, the person was still far away, but as the voice fell, he had already appeared next to Wang Xingxiao. He was dressed in white, with an evil face and a cold temperament. A vague but deadly danger suddenly spread in the forest. It was as thin as a needle but extremely sharp. Tide's pupils suddenly contracted. He stared at the man in white who suddenly appeared in front of him and said coldly, Who are you? My name is Daybreak. The man in white narrowed his eyes and looked playfully at Tide and Glacier, who looked like they were facing a formidable enemy. He said softly, You are no match for me. So they should go back to Chongdao with me. Do you have a problem with that? Tide sneered and was about to say something. Daybreak said meaningfully again, A word of advice. If you say something you will die. The night wind blew. Daybreak's soft tone revealed an indescribable weirdness and coldness, which made people's scalps numb. Are you friends? Tide stared at Daybreak and asked. He had never heard of the code name Daybreak, but he suddenly appeared here, and the vague sense of danger kept stimulating his skin all over. Tide was sure that this man in white with a weird background was at least a superior of the half-step invincible realm, and even if he was a superior of the half-step invincible realm, he should be a top-notch superior. For example, Azure Dragon Gongsun Qi of Zhongzhou State, Tribulation of Sai City, Saint of Samsara Palace, Firmament of the Wang family of Beihai. they were no match for such a person alone. But once they joined hands, it was hard to say who would win and who would lose. Tide clenched his fist and the killing intent flashed in his eyes. Daybreak shook his head with a smile, but his eyes drifted for a moment. He said blandly, "I was entrusted by someone. Someone asked me to bring them back to East Island safely." "Who is it?" Before Tide opened his mouth, Wang Xingxiao and Black Pupil had asked in unison. Samsara. Daybreak didn't seem to be on guard against a pair of twin brothers of the half-step invincible realm. He looked back at Wang Xingxiao with a smile and said in a soft tone, "To be exact, it should be Li Tianlan." Li Tianlan. Wang Xingxiao just looked weird. But Black Pupil and Firmament's faces suddenly changed. Vaguely, they knew that there seemed to be another knot between Li Tianlan and the Wang family of Beihai. Everyone had a reason to save the elites of Zhou state who were in East Island, except for Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan. Tide nodded. He's a very important person. In fact, if he wasn't in Changdao, maybe we would have done something to him. Daybreak couldn't help laughing. In the angry eyes of Tide and Glacier, his expression seemed to be a little sympathetic. "You two have good strength, but you can't do anything to him." "Really?" Glacier said coldly. A bolt of lightning had already begun to spread out from his palm. The lightning curled around him, illuminating his entire body with a dark blue color. "Of course not just me." Daybreak looked at Tide and Glacier meaningfully and said softly, "Your alertness is too poor. Didn't anyone tell you to pay attention to your back all the time?" Behind. Tide's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't move. Glacier had already turned his head around to take a quick glance. He just glanced back and turned around. Then his body shook and he suddenly froze on the spot. About 2 or 3 seconds later, he suddenly turned around again and looked behind him with an incredible shock on his face. Tide, who had sensed that something was wrong, felt his heart gradually sink. He suddenly pulled Glacier and the two brothers retreated dozens of meters away. Then they turned around. In an instant, Tide's eyes widened as he stared behind him, dumbfounded as if he had seen a ghost. In the dark forest, the rain was messy and the wind was howling. Everything in the forest was vague and indistinct. Behind the two of them, about 100 meters away, shadows slowly walked out of the blurry darkness one after another. They were in groups. Little by little, the fire lit up, and the hot temperature evaporated the rain curtain and baked the forest. Tide's face was pale and he felt a little cold all over. The figures in his sight were all superiors of the fire-flaming realm. In the darkness, there were flames mixed and connected, and the figures gathered together. Chapter 190. Once the chaos started, it obviously wouldn't stop in a short time. More and more superiors entered Changdao from different channels. The surprise attack on the outer defense line of Changdao on the first day wasn't the end. On the contrary, it was just a prelude. With the arrival of a large number of superiors from the Dark World, there were fights almost every day on the edge of Changdao. All the dark superpowers seemed to have reached a tacit agreement: let East Island bleed first. Even if a large number of elites from East Island were trapped in Zhou state. Even all the dark superpowers in the world started to gather in Changdao. But it was undeniable that this was still East Island's home ground. In a face-to-face battle, not to mention whether all the superpowers could unite, even if all of them gathered together, they might not be East Island's match. At the very least, even if they won, it would be a Pyrrhic victory and every superpower would suffer heavy losses, which no one was willing to accept. Right now, most of the elites of East Island gathered in Changdao and set up defense lines around Changdao. How could the superpowers let go of such an obvious target? Almost at the same time, everyone started to attack the special warfare defense line around Changdao again and again. The intensive and frequent raids didn't even give East Island a chance to reorganize. The result of being tired of dealing with them was a real bloodbath and corpses everywhere. On the last day of June, the third day after Li Tianlan woke up, East Island, which had been holding the defense line, finally began to recognize the reality. The defense lines around them all withdrew into the interior of Changdao. The elites of East Island, who had been fighting with the superpowers of the Dark World for a long time, had started to gather and reorganize. Changdao, which had been fighting for many days, seemed to have calmed down, but the undercurrents were getting more turbulent inside. The elites of Zhou state finally entered Changdao within 72 hours after Li Tianlan woke up, and they had settled down through the special channel of Samsara. Led by the Azure Dragon of Zhou State, Gong Sun Qi, 600 elites of Zhou State had also arrived in Changdao. East Island might have noticed it or maybe not. But from the beginning to the end, since the dark superpowers entered Changdao, East Island had been silent. The silent undercurrent was surging in Changdao. Every minute and every second, the city seemed to become more and more depressed. A great battle was imminent and it could erupt at any moment. The most oppressive and peaceful period before the great battle also became the rarest time for all parties to prepare. The underground organizations seized the time to mobilize their manpower and personally get into the situation to understand the current situation. The elites of Zhou State were recuperating. The first batch of Zhou State elites that entered East Island had nearly 2,000 people. After all of them arrived in Changdao, including the second batch of 600 elites, the total number of people was still nearly 2,000, and a lot of them were wounded, which showed how fierce the journey was. East Island, on the other hand, was integrating resources and collecting intelligence. There was no doubt that East Island had the most things to do, but they could do it with the power of the whole country, so they wouldn't be too slow. In the current situation, no matter which side was ready for the war, the Battle of Changdao that the whole dark world was looking forward to would break out completely. Therefore everyone was very anxious. Li Tianlan was in a hurry to recover. Since he entered Changdao, this could be said to be the most peaceful period. After his accumulated injuries broke out completely in the Battle of Zhongjing, he had fallen into an unprecedentedly weak state. It had been nearly a week since the Battle of Zhongjing. Many wounds on Li Tianlan's body had healed, but the recovery speed of his internal injuries wasn't ideal. The huge vitality in the immortality potion could make him recover much faster than others. Together with the daily routine treatment, he only recovered less than half of his injuries in nearly a week. Li Tianlan was very clear about his current injuries. If he wanted to recover completely, it would take at least half a month or even 20 days. The general trend couldn't be changed by his will. Now Li Tianlan could only hope that the final battle could come later the better. The rainstorm that swept the whole of East Island hit Changdao 3 days ago. The crazy rain and the fierce wind raged between heaven and earth. It was midsummer, but there was no heat, so the whole courtyard was slightly cold and cool. In the antique pavilion, Li Tianlan stood quietly, looking down at the clear pool that was disturbed by the rain, with a gentle and calm expression. This was the only water feature in this courtyard. In front of the door of the villa in the center of the courtyard, there was a pool with a diameter of about 20 or 30 meters. The pool was deep and there were hundreds of ornamental fish of different colors inside. The rainstorm fell messily in the clear pool, and the fish under the water kept surfacing and diving. The whole pool was shaking, full of ripples, but it couldn't turn over, just like Li Tianlan's ambition and desire that couldn't be stopped. The whistling wind took away the last remaining warmth in the pavilion. Li Tianlan, who wore a thin windbreaker, wrapped the lapels of his clothes and then stopped moving. In front of him was the pool and behind him were tables and chairs. There was a pot of tea on the light brown marble table, and a few teacups were scattered on the table. There were a lot of cigarette butts in the ashtray in the middle. It seemed that not long ago many people had a conversation in the pavilion. But no one knew how long the conversation had ended. The smoke in the pavilion drifted away, and the tea was completely cold. Li Tianlan stood quietly. His heart was restless with the wind and rain, but he looked calmer and gentler on the surface. Another group of fish jumped out of the water and then fell back down. Li Tianlan's eyes, which were very focused most of the time, gradually became unfocused as if he was in a trance. For the past few days he had been healing his wounds and he was also waiting for the opportunity that he didn't know would appear. It had been almost a month since he came to East Island. Fighting, blood, corpses, storms, fires and thunder filled Li Tianlan's mind. But Li Tianlan still didn't understand the meaning of all this. Zhou State and Samsara cooperated, and this plan could be described as a national effort, and they were still investing. East Island's special warfare elites were killed and injured, and Zhou State also paid a big price. But what was the meaning behind all these battles? They killed people, but this was East Island. If East Island didn't perish, what was the point of killing some special warfare elites? Zhou State and Samsara wanted the right to speak in the dark world of East Island. But now, no matter how he looked at it, Li Tianlan didn't see any possibility of yielding. Why did Zhou State think that after this battle, these resources and territories of East Island would belong to them? Horsewoman said he would see the answer soon. But Li Tianlan still had no clue. His mind was a little messy. Li Tianlan's imagination ran wild and his eyes became more and more unfocused. The storm hit Changdao in the pool in front of him. The weather was always gloomy and dark. Time seemed to stay still and it was already half the afternoon. At a certain moment Li Tianlan, who was standing quietly, suddenly focused his eyes. At the same time a gentle and smiling voice rang out. "This place is nice." Li Tianlan's eyes flickered and he turned around and said blandly, "It's really nice. You can live here if you like." This yard was the central area of the whole clubhouse. It was built in the mountains and the clubhouse surrounded by mountains was quiet. In this well-protected yard, the quiet atmosphere was aloof from the world. Up close there were lush grass, trees and clear water. From afar there were undulating mountains. This so-called top-end clubhouse in Changdao did have a kind of charm and style that made people forget the vulgar. This yard was arranged by Duke and Saint didn't object when he saw it. Living in the most distinguished yard in this clubhouse, Samsara wanted to express something simple and complicated. After the elites of Zhongzhou state arrived in Changdao, Li Tianlan vaguely understood some subtle meanings. There was only one villa in the yard, but Li Tianlan didn't live alone. Several people from East Emperor Palace and Dongqing Rushi lived here for a few days. But most of the time they were either meditating or resting and healing. They didn't have much time to talk. It was almost the same as if he was alone. "Forget it for me." The uninvited visitor smiled and there was a kind of sincere kindness in his smile, which made it hard to tell whether he was sincere or not. "This is what Samsara did to elevate your status. What's the point of me living here?" He paused and the smile on his handsome and gentle face was still sincere. He said softly, "If I live here, aren't you afraid that I'll sneak attack and kill you when you're meditating?" Li Tianlan's tone became calmer. "Why not?" Wang Xingxiao, who didn't hold an umbrella but was still dry and clean, walked into the pavilion. He smiled softly and said, "From the standpoint of the Wang family of Beihai and myself, if I want to kill you, I don't even need to find a reason because there are too many reasons." Li Tianlan looked at him with a faint smile, but his eyes were unfathomable and dead. Wang Xingxiao broke through the siege and came to the club yesterday. Firmament and Black Pupil, who were seriously injured, followed him. Li Tianlan hadn't seen any of them, but he roughly understood what was going on. Samsara rescued the three of them at the most critical moment through the special channel of its partners. In this respect the three of them all owed Li Tianlan a big favor or even a life-saving favor. Wang Xingxiao didn't meet Li Tianlan immediately, but he didn't delay too long. After arriving last night and taking a quick rest, the heir of the Wang family of Beihai rushed here as soon as possible. Li Tianlan didn't say a word. He just quietly looked into Wang Xingxiao's eyes. Wang Xingxiao was in a very good state of mind. His face was a little pale but his eyes were full of energy. He wore a very simple and clean light-colored suit and carried a long box in his hand. Although he said he wanted to kill him, he didn't mean to do it at all. "And if I want to kill you, maybe I've already done it?" Wang Xingxiao paused for a while and said meaningfully, "I'm still alive." Li Tianlan's tone was calm. Facing Wang Xingxiao, his mind was actually a little complicated. But the conversation in this soft voice was not like a meeting between a brother-in-law and his brother-in-law. Li Tianlan, who had recognized the reality, naturally regarded Wang Xingxiao as an opponent, even an enemy. "As long as I'm alive, I'll know what you've done sooner or later." "As you're still alive." Wang Xingxiao sighed softly, and his tone seemed a little complicated and weird. "To be honest, this is what surprises me the most. You're still alive and you saved me once. Is this your kindness to the Wang family of Beihai?" Li Tianlan shook his head expressionlessly and said coldly, "You're Yuetong's brother." Wang Xingxiao looked at Li Tianlan in silence for a long time. After a long time he handed the box in his hand to Li Tianlan and said with a smile, "There's a little misunderstanding between us. This is my compensation." "Nice stuff." Li Tianlan was a little confused. He didn't know what misunderstanding could there be between him and Wang Xingxiao. He took the box and opened it. An extremely ferocious and weird sniper rifle suddenly appeared in the box. The ferocious body of the gun showed a different kind of delicacy. It was black all over, faintly exuding a kind of scorching and death aura. It looked very familiar. Li Tianlan's pupils shrank. In an instant, cold and sharp killing intent was suddenly released from his body. Good gun. He was silent for a while and said in a cold tone. Of course it was a good gun, and it was a good gun that had almost killed him several times. Grim smile. The grim smile in Heavenly Calamity's hand. For a moment, all kinds of thoughts popped up in Li Tianlan's mind. This is Heavenly Calamity's apology. Wang Xingxiao said softly, I can fully represent his position. I hope the grievances between you can be resolved for the time being. Take this gun as a gift from him. Heavenly Calamity. Heavenly Calamity, who ranked 5th on the killer list in the Dark World, was from the Wang family of Beihai? The Wang family of Beihai was really full of experts. Li Tianlan sneered in his heart, but his eyes grew colder. He didn't ask about the specific relationship between Heavenly Calamity and the Wang family of Beihai. Some questions were not suitable to be asked. Sometimes not asking could be considered as having some leeway. He touched the gun casually and directly returned the box to Wang Xingxiao. He said with a smile, this gun is very powerful. I've seen it myself. But it's too expensive for me to accept. Give it back to him for me. Wang Xingxiao was obviously stunned for a moment. He looked at Li Tianlan's smiling face seriously and then at his hand. Li Tianlan's expression didn't change at all. Do you know what you're refusing? Wang Xingxiao looked at Li Tianlan and asked in a serious tone. Li Tianlan's words and actions were equivalent to refusing the reconciliation of the Wang family of Beihai. How many years has it been since something like this happened? He wants to kill me. Li Tianlan's expression was calm. He smiled and said softly, I'll kill whoever wants to kill me. One gun is not enough. It's not impossible to solve this. I want Heavenly Calamity's head. If he's dead, I'll pretend that this never happened. Looking at Wang Xingxiao's eyes that suddenly became cold, Li Tianlan continued, Samsara can also pretend that nothing happened. A smile gradually appeared on the corner of Wang Xingxiao's mouth. His tone seemed to be mixed with cold wind, piercing to the bone. The Wang family of Beihai doesn't accept coercion. Besides, Samsara may not be able to protect you in everything. Li Tianlan agreed and said straightforwardly, we don't see eye to eye. That's it. He turned around and walked directly out of the pavilion. Decisive, straightforward, and indifferent. Wait. The corner of Wang Xingxiao's eyes suddenly jumped. He gritted his teeth. Obviously, such a scene was somewhat embarrassing for the Wang family of Beihai, which had always been strong. Wang Xingxiao's expression was also a little unnatural. But thinking of Li Tianlan's life-saving grace, he took a deep breath and said in a low voice, Can't this be discussed? Li Tianlan's footsteps paused slightly. Yes. He said indifferently, Heavenly Calamity killed me twice. I don't want his broken spear. Either he dies or he works for me for 2 years. This price is really high. Wang Xingxiao mocked. Heavenly Calamity was a super killer ranked 5th on the killer list. Everyone knew how long it would take for him to work for 2 years. At least this price. Li Tianlan and his East Emperor Palace were absolutely unable to pay for it at present. Li Tianlan turned around and looked at Wang Xingxiao. Wang Xingxiao took a deep breath and suddenly said calmly, It's not me who wants to kill you this time. Someone else hired Heavenly Calamity, but he reported it to the Wang family of Beihai. To be exact, he told me. I know about it and I acquiesced. Li Tianlan still didn't say a word. I didn't expect you to save me. Wang Xingxiao shook his head and said with a self-mocking smile, I'm in the wrong in this matter. I'll talk to him about Heavenly Calamity. As for the result, I can't guarantee. He took out a folded A4 paper from his arms and handed it to Li Tianlan. This is my compensation. It's the unique skill of the Wang family of Beihai against the Way of Heaven. Under the Invincible Realm, it can temporarily improve one's combat capability by consuming one's potential. It's not a good thing, but it's very rare in the outside world. I think it should be useful to you. Li Tianlan's expression was still calm. Even in the face of a core unique skill of the Wang family of Beihai, and it was the core unique skill that was most useful to him, his expression didn't change at all. He thought about it and reached out to take it. You and I are even. My life is not so cheap. Wang Xingxiao said flatly, and your life is also valuable. You saved me today. If you lose to me in the future, I'll spare your life. Li Tianlan sneered. I saved you because of Yuetong. So, you and I are even today. If I really lose in the future, I don't need you to spare my life. Because if I win, I won't spare you. So do what you have to do. You'd rather die than be defeated. There was a hint of playfulness in Wang Xingxiao's smile. Are you so confident? Li Tianlan turned his head and looked at the wind and rain outside the window. He said calmly, I can't be defeated in my life. Wang Xingxiao took a deep look at him and turned to leave the pavilion. Behind him, Li Tianlan tore the paper that recorded the way of heaven into pieces and threw it into the pool. He said flatly, what's the point? After the reconciliation, enemies were still enemies after all. Why is it pointless? An elegant and calm voice suddenly rang out behind him. Chapter 191. The voice was elegant and peaceful, passing through the hustle and bustle of the wind and rain, with a kind of charm that calmed all the chaos. The rainstorm cleared the pond, but it suddenly quieted down in the pavilion. The paper fragments that recorded the unique skills of the Wang family flew to every corner of the courtyard with the wind. Li Tianlan turned around calmly and looked at the figure that quietly appeared in the pavilion. He asked with slight confusion, You are? The man who appeared alone in front of Li Tianlan should be regarded as a young man, no more than 40 years old at most. He had very capable short hair and tight skin. His appearance was not particularly handsome, but he had a strong sense of firmness and toughness. Judging from his appearance, people would believe that he was in his 20s, but his eyes quietly revealed something else. It was a pair of eyes that was completely opposite to his temperament. They were gentle and soft without any sharpness but full of hardships. A very special man and also a very contradictory man. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at his slightly smiling face, remaining calm and collected. From the first time he saw him, Li Tianlan didn't know why he thought of Dongqing Wudi. They were vaguely similar but slightly different. Every move of the Zhongzhou state god of massacre carried a kind of soul-shaking killing intent, which was extremely sharp. In Li Tianlan's eyes, the marshal of the Dongqing clan was full of killing intent and majestic momentum, but his momentum was so strong that the higher he went, the narrower the pattern of martial arts became, so that there was no hope of entering the invincible realm. The man in front of him, not to mention military talent, could even be regarded as an upgraded version of Dongqing Wudi in martial arts. He was gentle and elegant. He sat there quietly without any killing intent, but the whole courtyard was full of killing intent. His momentum was restrained and the pattern was grand. There was a vague trend of entering the invincible realm. Since Li Tianlan entered the secular world, he had only seen this kind of extremely perfect and natural feeling in a few people. Excluding Wang Tianzong, who had entered the invincible realm, the first one was naturally Tribulation. Tribulation's martial arts path was unprecedented. After the completion of martial arts, he did not enter the invincible realm, so he could only rely on himself to continue to explore. The second one was Saint of Samsara. It was basically a matter of time for him to enter the invincible realm. The third one was the one in front of him. In terms of the perfection of martial arts momentum, he gave Li Tianlan the feeling that he was even slightly above Tribulation and Saint. An expert of the invincible realm? Li Tianlan's heart shook, but he looked calmer on the surface. A man dressed in casual clothes casually sat on the stone table. With a slight wave of his hand, a flame lit up and the tea on the table was instantly heated up. Did you have a guest before? And the boy from the Wang family of Beihai, you are a busy man now. Do you treat everyone who comes to see you like this? He narrowed his eyes and chuckled. Vigilant, on guard and ready to strike at any time? Sir is different from them. Li Tianlan stood where he was and said calmly, I don't think there's anything here that's worth the patronage of an invincible realm expert. The man with a gentle aura was obviously stunned. A trace of sadness flashed across his eyes, and then he smiled and said, I'm not an invincible realm expert. Li Tianlan was both embarrassed and confused. The consummation of martial arts was naturally his personal feeling, which was not authoritative. But the Li family, which had produced 9 generations of invincible realm experts, should not be wrong to have some feelings. Why? The man seemed to know what Li Tianlan was thinking. He shook his head and said calmly, I had a great chance to enter the invincible realm, but I was injured once and my martial arts path was broken. He lowered his eyelids and a trace of coldness flashed in his eyes. Li Tianlan nodded without too much curiosity. The injury could make a genius cut off his invincible realm path, and he knew there must be a lot of secrets. He looked at the man in front of him and asked again, "Then you are?" Gongsunji. The man's tone was indifferent and even elegant. Azure Dragon of Zhongzhou State. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows in awe and even a little flattered. He was one of the 4 captains of the most powerful and mysterious terracotta army in Zhongzhou State, and he was also the first captain. He was currently recognized as the strongest expert under the invincible realm in the Dark World. He was absolutely neutral and did not interfere in anything inside Zhongzhou State. He was always fighting against the outside world. Outside the Dark World he was unknown whether he was alive or dead. He was a real hero. Li Tianlan knew that Gong Sunqi was living in the club now, but he didn't think he could have any connection with this kind of person. One was absolutely neutral and the other was entangled with gratitude and hatred. Their positions were not opposite but they were diametrically opposite. The biggest connection between them was probably hidden in the same club. At least before just now, Li Tianlan had never thought that Gong Sunqi would specifically look for him. It was not logical at all. General Gong Sun. Li Tianlan slightly relaxed his body and sat on the stone bench. But after calling him he really didn't know what to say to the azure dragon hidden in the dark, so he just came straight to the point. "General, what can I do for you?" Back to the question just now. Gong Sunqi sat in a very relaxed way and said with a smile, "I came earlier so I heard the latter part of your conversation with Wang Xingxiao. To be honest, I think he is very sincere. Why do you think it doesn't make sense?" He paused, looked at Li Tianlan meaningfully and said softly, "Are you hostile to the Wang family of Beihai?" Li Tianlan's heart skipped a beat, but his expression was still calm. Hostile to the Wang family of Beihai? Whether there was or not, it was not a topic that could be told to outsiders. He lowered his head. And it was not a matter of whether he was hostile to the Wang family of Beihai, but whether the Wang family of Beihai had the intention to kill him. This time Wang Xingxiao could acquiesce that Heavenly Calamity accepted the task to kill him. What would happen next time? Such a reconciliation seemed to be sincere, but in fact, it was to stabilize him. In fact, it was of no use. The next time the Wang family of Beihai thought he deserved to die, they would not give in because of today's reconciliation. So when facing Wang Xingxiao just now, whether Li Tianlan compromised or was tough, he would not change the position of the Wang family of Beihai. "General Gongsun, in fact this question of yours is also meaningless." Li Tianlan finally opened his mouth, speaking in a very slow and cautious tone. "It is meaningful." Gong Sunqi looked at Li Tianlan, and a trace of paranoia flashed in his eyes, which had always been gentle and calm. The hidden killing intent in all directions was slowly condensing. For a moment the sound of rain and wind faded away, and the whole pavilion was quiet. The unique skill of the Wang family of Beihai, against the way of heaven, should be the unique skill you need the most now, right? It can temporarily improve the combat capability of a whole realm. Although the price is not small, it can save your life at a critical moment. Isn't it meaningful for you? Li Tianlan was silent. Against the way of heaven was indeed the unique skill he needed the most. A unique skill that could help him enter the thunder-shocking realm, even if it was only one strike, was enough for Li Tianlan to face most situations with confidence. But Wang Xingxiao's movements were a little slow. The current against the way of heaven was completely a piece of waste paper for him. At most, it could play a little role in concealment. Moreover, he was actually in the ice-condensing realm, and now it was already his limit to control the strength of the fire-flaming realm. If he used against the way of heaven again in the fire-flaming realm, even if the price was smaller than the price he paid to restore the thunder-shocking realm, how much smaller could it be? Li Tianlan shook his head subconsciously and looked at Gong Sunqi, who seemed to be quietly drinking tea in front of him. Vaguely, he seemed to be able to feel the storm brewing in Gong Sunqi's heart. A storm far more turbulent than today's storm. Li Tianlan's heart skipped a beat, but he said calmly, "But what does it mean to you? Or if I admit that I'm hostile to the Wang family of Beihai, will you attack me?" The corner of his mouth twitched, and there was an obvious mockery in his calmness. "Neutral? Huh. With your identity, it's normal to be hostile to the Wang family of Beihai. I just want to remind you that as long as it's beneficial to you, even if it comes from the enemy, you can still use it. Some persistence is ridiculous in the dark world." Gong Sunqi's tone was indifferent, but under the indifferent appearance, the storm that was about to rise became more and more obvious. "Identity? Identity." Gong Sunqi narrowed his eyes and looked at Li Tianlan. Your identity is obviously not a secret, at least in Zhou state. After the battle between Gu Xingyun and the master of Samsara Palace, the speculation about you can basically be confirmed. The successor of the Li family, so now it's not the Wang family of Beihai who wants to kill you the most but Kunlun City. But after Kunlun City, it's probably the Wang family of Beihai who wants to kill you the most. Boy, I'm afraid you won't have a good time in Zhou state in the future. Li Tianlan's expression was calm. A fire was ignited in his hand, and the blazing light illuminated the already dim pavilion. The tea in the cup became warm again. Li Tianlan took a sip of tea and said expressionlessly, So, when the darkness enveloped the courtyard and the light disappeared, there seemed to be a trace of gloomy killing intent in Gong Sun Chi's eyes. He suddenly chuckled and said coldly, Do you know why I can't enter the invincible realm? Li Tianlan's heart skipped a beat. Gong Sun Chi just said that the reason why he couldn't enter the invincible realm was that he had been injured once. Was there a secret? Li Tianlan felt a little ridiculous, but he still said subconsciously, Is it the Wang family of Beihai? Or Kunlun City? At this point, it was obvious that the two sides were not familiar with each other. But thinking of his identity and position, Li Tianlan could roughly understand the reason why Gong Sun Chi was so bold. He smiled bitterly and instinctively didn't want to get involved in this matter. But he had to listen to Gong Sun Chi's experience. Someone blocked Gong Sun Chi's way. If he entered the invincible realm in the future, would someone also block his way? I don't know. Gong Sun Chi's tone was indifferent, as if he was talking about something that had nothing to do with him. There was no anger, no resentment, only a kind of indifference without the slightest emotion. When I was trying to break through the invincible realm in the past, I was ambushed. My preparation in advance was useless, and the ambusher almost succeeded easily. I don't know who did it, but I know what it means for Zhou state once I enter the invincible realm. Li Tianlan was speechless. What did it mean for Zhou state if Gong Sun Chi entered the invincible realm? Now Gong Sun Chi was neutral. But once he entered the invincible realm, he was likely to become a neutral force. Pure neutrality had no stance, but did neutral forces also have no stance? For example, who could say that Sai City, which stood aloof from worldly affairs, had no stance? In the past, no matter which of the two forces blocked Gong Sun Chi's way to the invincible realm, no matter what the original purpose was, the ultimate goal must be to facilitate them to better control the special warfare system of Zhou state. From this perspective, such an approach was very similar to Kunlun City and the Wang family of Beihai's strong opposition to Samsara Palace's entry into Zhou state in recent years. And the purpose was even more similar. Li Tianlan looked at Gong Sun Chi in silence as if deep in thought. What do you think of Wang Xingxiao? Gong Sun Chi suddenly asked. He deserves to be a young heavenly son. Li Tianlan seemed to be absent-minded and responded carelessly. Gong Sun Chi nodded and said flatly, I don't like him. Of course I don't like Gu Hanshan either. Li Tianlan nodded, took out a cigarette, lit it and said in a low voice, I'm afraid General Gongsun doesn't have a say in the position of spirit tortoise, right? It's an internal affair of Zhou state. It's also an internal affair of the Terracotta Army. If my words can't be used as a reference, what's the point of me being the captain and the first captain at that? Gong Sun Chi looked at Li Tianlan with a smile. You know this, which means you've been paying attention. I might as well tell you that Jiang Shangyu was seriously injured in East Island for some reason, and now he has secretly sneaked back to Zhou state. He's out of the competition in advance this time. So, if you want Gu Hanshan and Wang Xingxiao to be out of the competition, the Battle of Changdao is a good opportunity. Li Tianlan, how about I find an opportunity to put you on the stage? Your realm is low but your combat capability is good. The operation space is small but it's not impossible. Hee. Li Tianlan took a drag on the cigarette and looked at Gong Sun Chi with a faint smile. Is this a deal? Gong Sun Chi used his influence to stop Gu Hanshan and Wang Xingxiao, and as a price he had to stand on the stage to compete with the two young heavenly sons and bear the attacks of the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City. As for the operation Gong Sun Chi mentioned, Li Tianlan completely regarded it as nonsense. Gong Sun Chi didn't like Gu Hanshan and Wang Xingxiao, and he might not like Li Tianlan. Putting Li Tianlan on the stage was just to attract fire. When everything was almost done, maybe Gong Sun Chi would take out his real candidate. At this moment, Gong Sun Chi was still calm, but Li Tianlan vaguely sensed a storm-like ambition. If you say so, then so be it. Gong Sun Chi chuckled and said meaningfully, Li Tianlong, don't think too highly of neutrality. The Terracotta Army is indeed neutral, but such neutrality is required by the higher-ups, not something we are willing to keep silent about. This is the rule. Do you understand? As for some things outside the rule, as long as we don't go too far like Zhou Xian, the higher-ups won't care too much about it. In the night rain, his voice seemed to have an indescribable temptation. If this cooperation goes well, I'm afraid there will be many opportunities for us to cooperate in the future. You should consider my proposal. Sorry. Li Tianlong said indifferently, I'm not interested. You're really not interested? Gong Sun Chi looked at Li Tianlong with playful eyes. Li Tianlong sneered and said nothing. Not interested? How could it be possible? However, he knew very well that now was not the time for him to be interested in these things. For Gu Hanshan and Wang Xingxiao, the position of the four spirits in Zhongzhou State was the best shortcut to become the god of war in Zhongzhou State. If he competed for this position with his own identity, even if his realm was low and his combat capability was low, it was enough to make the higher-ups consider it seriously, and even cause great vigilance and uneasiness of Kunlun City and the Wang family of Beihai. Not to mention whether he could sit in this position or not. Even if he did, it was tantamount to courting death. The current opportunity was indeed good, but the timing was not right. And Li Tianlong glanced at Gong Sun Chi. They were neither relatives nor friends, and they had just met for the first time. Why would Gong Sun Chi help him? Purely using himself to attract the firepower should be the most appropriate. Not interested. Li Tianlong said flatly, if General Gong Sun is here for this, then I'm sorry to disappoint you. He stood up and was about to leave. There's one more thing. Gong Sun Chi's expression was calm, and no one could tell whether he was happy or angry, disappointed or not. Li Tianlong frowned slightly and didn't speak. Before I came to East Island, someone asked me to bring you a message. I owed this person a big favor back then, so I had to bring this message. Gong Sun Chi said in a low voice. There was supposed to be another young man in this battle of Changdao, but he was stopped before he left. Although this person is still in Zhongzhou State, the person who stopped him has already arrived in East Island. So be careful. Who? Li Tianlong was baffled. The hint was so vague that he couldn't figure it out at all. I don't know. Gong Sun Chi shook his head. I just brought a message. The person didn't say who it was. Why not? Li Tianlong frowned and subconsciously muttered to himself. An inexplicable hint seemed to be kind, but what was the truth? I don't know. Gong Sun Chi still shook his head. He seemed to think about it seriously and then said with some uncertainty, I'm afraid, it's hard to say, right? Hard to say. Li Tianlong smiled bitterly and said helplessly, then who asked you to bring this message to me? General Gong Sun can tell me, right? Gong Sun Chi let out a low laugh. The space in the pavilion twisted and his figure had disappeared. His low and soft voice sounded in the air as if he was still there.